My wife asked for an open marriage, then cheated on me. I refused and found love again in the end. Arthur, are you listening? You just need to sign the papers and we're finished. My wife, Annie, whom I've been married to for over 25 years, was speaking to me. I tried to pay attention, but her voice seemed to drift further away as her rant continued. It all began this afternoon when I came home from work. Annie sat at the table with a glass of wine and a determined expression. Unfortunately, she only had one glass, neglecting to consider if I might want one too, especially given the direction our conversation was taking. I sensed trouble brewing as I sat down. Without asking about my day, Annie plunged into the news that she was leaving me. She claimed to have found her soulmate, someone who made her happier than I ever did, rendering me no longer adequate. Despite her escalating volume, her words became increasingly distant to me. Our story followed a familiar pattern. We met in high school, stayed together, and welcomed our daughter, Sally, shortly after getting married. While she wasn't the primary reason we tied the knot, she was always part of the plan. Presently, we both held steady jobs, lived comfortably, and had managed to pay off our house with some savings to boot. We frequently professed our love, took family vacations, and though our physical closeness had waned over time, we still found moments of closeness. I believed our love ran deep, and we were destined to grow old together until this afternoon. Annie's rant continued, her face reddening with each passing moment. Arthur, look at me. It became increasingly difficult to focus, but I turned towards her. You need to sign these papers. She pointed adamantly at the documents before me. Her tone was demanding, yet I struggled to maintain concentration. It felt as though the room's brightness and color were fading, despite the kitchen lights being on. Internally, I was fraught with emotion, but externally my body remained unresponsive. The longer I remained silent, the angrier Annie grew. The last thing I remember is her slap. Though I couldn't feel the impact, I imagined it leaving a prominent red mark, but still, I couldn't move, and the world seemed to darken around me. It had been a long day. The drive home from university was delayed due to an accident, slowing everyone down. When I arrived home, there was an eerie quietness in the house. The lights were on, Dad's car was in the driveway, but Mom's was nowhere to be seen. Upon entering the kitchen, I threw my bag and books on the ground. Dad sat at the table, motionless, staring into space. On the table lay an open bottle of Mom's wine and a mostly empty glass. In front of Dad were papers with numerous "Sign Here" tabs. Approaching Dad, I touched his shoulder from behind. Hey, Dad? I anticipated a response, but he remained unresponsive. Walking around to face him, I was taken aback. His eyes appeared glazed, almost milky white, with traces of tears staining his cheeks. He wasn't blinking, and a trail of drool hung from his mouth, threatening to drip into his lap. Panicked, I called out, Dad, Dad, come back to me, Dad. Tears welled in my eyes. With no response from Dad, I tried to calm myself. Slow down, Sally. Dad needs help, I whispered to myself. Retrieving my phone, I dialed emergency. I explained that my father, Arthur, was unresponsive. After providing my details and address, they dispatched an ambulance, promising a 10-minute arrival time. I sat beside Dad, holding his hand, offering reassurance. This man had been my everything growing up. Despite his demanding job, he always made time for my school events, musical and ballet. He endured my early attempts at the violin, encouraging me every step of the way. On my 16th birthday, he surprised me with a hand-signed violin, not the best, but it held sentimental value as it came from him. Now, 5 years later, I was studying music at university with a focus on strings and violin, thanks to his unwavering support. As I waited, questions raced through my mind. Why was Dad like this? What had happened? And where was Mom? Glancing at the paperwork on the table, the words "petition for divorce" caught my eye. Shocked, I began reading, my skin crawling at the revelation that Mom wanted to divorce Dad for reasons unknown to me. It appeared highly likely that Dad's condition stemmed from the documents, especially considering Mom's open wine bottle, indicating she had given Dad the papers and left. People often speculate on the rapid fluctuation of emotions. I suppose they've never experienced such a betrayal. For me, any compassion and desire to be in my mother's presence faded away shortly after. The ambulance arrived, and I directed them in getting Dad onto a gurney and off to the hospital. After locking up the house, I followed behind, making calls as I drove. I contacted my grandmother, Dad's mom, his sister Rhonda, his best friend, and then his manager at work, informing them of Dad's situation and his impending absence. I explained that I found him unresponsive and that he was en route to the hospital. Everyone requested updates on his condition, and his manager assured me of arranging emergency leave and informing their boss. I knew I was putting off the next call, consumed with anger, but I felt compelled to call Mom. The phone rang and she answered after a couple of rings. "Hi, Sally, my darling. How was your day?" I was taken aback by her casual tone. Surely she couldn't be so naive as to think I wouldn't know what was happening. It had been almost an hour since I found Dad, and Mom was well aware of my routine. "Where are you, Mom?" "I'm out and about, sweetie," she trailed off, sensing my inquiry. "So, in other words, you've just shattered my father, your husband, and left him without a second thought." "Oh no." "Darling, I tried to explain to your father about Paul and the situation, but he wasn't responsive, so I thought it best to leave and let him process that we won't be living with him anymore." Her attempt to downplay the situation infuriated me. Given Dad's state, it seemed more likely that she had ripped his heart out and left it shattered before him. "It appears to me like you abandoned him when he needed help. Are you truly that heartless? Do you even understand what's happening now, or do you simply not care?" Anger began to seep into my voice. "Sweetie, don't get angry now. I understand this is a shock, but your father will be fine. I'm only asking for what is rightfully mine and some support while Paul and I wait to marry." Yep, my mother was firmly in la-la land. "Angry? You haven't seen angry yet, Mother. And just so you know, I'm currently following Dad to the hospital. He's in an ambulance, and when I got home, he looked like he'd had a stroke." "Oh, Sally, my sweetie, I'm sorry to hear that, but—" "No excuses, Mother. Let me ask you, is this Paul you're running off with the same Paul from your work that you keep talking about?" She hesitated. "Of course, darling, Paul. The man from my mother's workplace she never stopped mentioning. So let me get this straight. He's a dozen years younger than you, and you've been having an affair with him for how long again?" She hesitated. 6 months. "Right, so for the last 6 months, you've been involved with someone from your workplace behind Dad's back. You've been lying to Dad and me, hiding your affair. I had no idea you were capable of such deceit, and clearly neither did Dad, judging by the state you left him in. How did you expect either of us to react? Well, I suppose not positively at first, but once we're living with Paul, you'll see we're meant to be together." "We?" She had just referred to we for the second time. Did she expect me to abandon Dad to move in with her and her boyfriend? I could feel my anger boiling over. I knew I would say something regrettable if I didn't stop. I'm going to hang up now before I say something I might regret. But let me be crystal clear. I will not be leaving Dad, and there's no way I'm going anywhere near Paul, let alone moving into the place you and he are cavorting in. "Sally," my mother responded sharply. "I am your mother, and I will not be spoken to like that, regardless of how upset you are." "Then I guess we're done talking." I hung up before she could say anything else. If she thought I would condone what she was doing, she had another thing coming. She tried calling me back multiple times, then started calling Dad's phone, which was silly because, if he could, I doubted he would pick up a call from her. Since I had Dad's phone with me, I ignored any calls from her. By the time I reached the hospital, the ambulance crew had admitted Dad, and he was in a ward under observation. Rhonda had arrived and informed me that she had also received several calls from my mother but wasn't sure what was happening, other than her brother being in the hospital. When I explained the situation, Aunt Rhonda turned a deep shade of scarlet, almost as if steam were coming out of her ears. "Sally, do you have the documents that woman left for my brother?" "Sure, Aunt Rhonda, here you go." Aside from being my aunt, Rhonda was also our family attorney. For the next hour, we sat beside Dad as Rhonda read through the documents, occasionally muttering under her breath. Doctors and nurses came in and out of the room periodically, checking on Dad. "Well, the bad news is that your mother is going to get her divorce from your father. The schedule outlined here shows that this process has been in motion for over 2 months and had to be served this week, or it would have incurred significantly higher fees from her legal team." I shrugged. I had heard enough justification from my mother. I was determined to ensure that she and Dad separated for what she had done. It was strange. I was never particularly close to my father, always looking up to my mom, but her actions seemed plain foolish. This whole mess seemed to be orchestrated by Paul, her so-called soulmate. Regardless, Mom and Dad weren't going to weather this storm, especially if Dad's current condition was any indication. The good news is that she hired a shyster of a lawyer to represent her. She's going to have to shell out a hefty sum just for the divorce, and even more if it goes to court. Rhonda grinned. "Meanwhile, my dear brother has the best lawyer in town, and he's getting the family discount." We shared a smile for the first time that evening. Additionally, some of the claims here, like wanting 50% equity in the house and 60% of the financial assets, along with spousal and child maintenance, are likely quite exaggerated. "I assume from your reaction that you're not planning to live with your mother?" I shook my head in confirmation. "Good, okay, I have some initial thoughts. However, We need to see what happens with your dad over the next 24 hours. Your mother could already be in hot water for abandonment and mental cruelty." The next few days flew by, with doctors constantly checking on Dad. Physically, he was fine and healthy, but he remained unresponsive. I managed to continue my university studies in the hospital chair by his bed, laptop, and textbook in hand. Occasionally, a family member would relieve me, allowing me to go home, catch a few hours of sleep, and return. I'll admit, I shed a few tears at home, alone in the house. One of the most surprising moments during Dad's hospital stay was when Tina Williams, the owner of the company where Dad worked, paid him a visit. While I knew Dad's manager Tom, I had never met Tina herself. Tina was a striking woman, curvaceous without being overweight, with tan skin, dark raven hair, and mesmerizing blue eyes that could make any person, male or female, swoon. As it turned out, Dad had been part of a group at his workplace that had supported Tina a few years back during her messy divorce. Her unfaithful ex-husband had attempted to claim a significant portion of their savings and nearly succeeded in taking half of her business. Dad had introduced her to Aunt Rhonda, who had successfully protected Tina's assets, ensuring she didn't lose any business shares and securing child support for her then 6-year-old daughter. Tina visited Dad several times, expressing shock when I briefed her on the general summary of why he was hospitalized. She brought cards from everyone at Dad's workplace and spent time holding his hand, sharing stories from the office. It turned out Dad had a knack for humor in the workplace, and his absence was deeply felt by his colleagues. I should mention that Dad is an accountant by profession, working for one of the financial clearinghouses that assist banks in processing payments to financial institutions. While the work may be tedious, Dad apparently brightened up the workday for everyone with his humor and presence. About 2 weeks later, I returned from a shower and a nap at home to find Rhonda and Tina in the midst of a conversation. Although it seemed a bit heated, their frustration was aimed at my mother rather than each other. It turned out that my mother had sent a demand letter to Tina, requesting access to all of Dad's bonuses from the past few years. It didn't matter that the bonuses had already been paid out. The letter demanded that she receive 50% of them within 30 days into a designated bank account, or she would pursue legal action against Tina. Besides the absurdity of her claim for money already dispersed, it seems like she and her new partner are in dire financial straits, since I've frozen all the joint assets while Arthur is incapacitated, Rhonda remarked, sporting an exploitative grin. I chuckled, making my presence known. Yes, this morning I received my first communication from Mom in 2 weeks, a text message asking if I could lend her a few thousand. I haven't responded because I'm still pretty upset with her. I mean, she hasn't even asked about Dad since I told her what she did to him. Over the past couple of weeks, Tina had become fiercely protective of my dad. Whenever my mother was brought up, Tina's eyes narrowed, her voice dropping in pitch, indicating her deep disdain for Annie. It was as if I could see sparks flickering around her smoldering eyes. I just hoped she never had to be in the same room with my mother. Otherwise, I feared she might incinerate her on the spot. Despite my current feelings toward my mother, she was still my mother. She has destroyed the most wonderful man, Sally. If it weren't for your father, I wouldn't have my Clarice or my business. So many people in the office helped me during one of the lowest points in my life, but your father took the time to listen to me. He never judged my ex-husband or me, he just let me talk. No one has ever done that without offering an opinion. He introduced me to your aunt here, ensuring I was taken care of. If he were single, I would have pursued him with everything I had after my divorce. I shrugged, letting a smile grace my face. He won't be married much longer. Their faces registered realization, and Rhonda giggled while Tina smiled. Thanks, Sally. I needed that. I still can't believe what your mother has done to him, or that she discarded such an amazing man. I need to head back to the office, but before I do, Tina walked over to my dad, and as Rhonda and I watched, she bent down and gave him a tender but sincere kiss on the lips. She looked up at us and smiled. However, her smile quickly turned into shock when my dad emitted a groan. As I gradually woke up, I sensed soft lips on mine, just the right amount of pressure, conveying a gentle and tender affection I hadn't felt in a long time. The hospital room's beeping and my groans reminded me of my surroundings. Anticipating Annie's presence as I opened my eyes after that affectionate kiss, I was surprised to find Tina standing there with a smile on her face. Approaching from the other side of the bed, Sally and Rhonda joined us. "It's okay, Daddy, you're going to be okay, you hear?" As my memories caught up with me, I realized Annie was leaving me or had already left. What happened? Over the next few minutes, the three of them filled me in on how Sally had found me unresponsive, called an ambulance, and discovered the divorce papers revealing Annie's months-long infidelity. I learned how Annie had threatened Tina once Rhonda froze our finances until they could determine my condition. How long? 2 weeks, Arthur, Rhonda replied. I turned to Tina. You kissed me? Tina blushed. Yeah, sorry, I was about to head back to the office and was saying goodbye. I smiled. No, it's okay. I guess I'm on the market, so I think it's okay. Over the next few hours, various doctors came through, conducting physical checkups, blood tests, and more. Tina canceled her visit to the office and stayed along with Rhonda and Sally. Among the doctors was a psychologist. As he probed into my experiences, I recounted finding Annie alone, drinking, and her announcement of leaving me. I described how the world seemed to lose color, and sensory input became disjointed, making it difficult to move despite growing upset. My last memory was of Annie slapping and yelling at me, her words incomprehensible. The girls collectively gasped at the revelation of Annie's aggression while I was unable to respond. Dad, what time do you think it was when you became unresponsive? I'd say it was around 5:30, baby. Why? Because it was past 7:30 when I got home and found you, and there was no red mark on your cheek. So I assume Mom must have left you there alone for quite some time. The psychologist interjected. It's not uncommon for someone in your situation to experience misuse while unresponsive. In your case, I'd say you went into shock upon hearing your wife's declaration of leaving you. Although this is a much more extreme case than usual, it does make sense. Rhonda added, when Arthur was young, there was a bully a few years older than him. He teased Arthur quite a bit, and one day a neighborhood parent found Arthur lying on the ground in a local park. Our parents put him to bed and he woke up the next morning. It wasn't overthought, as he woke up regularly the next day, but it did happen. I remember Billy pushing me around and teasing me in the park. After a while, I didn't know what happened, but when I woke up, Mom and Dad told me I had passed out and someone brought me home. When I told them about Billy, they spoke to his parents. The next day, Billy came up to me at school and apologized. I chuckled at the memory. I don't think he was sincere, but he never bothered me again after that day. I believe we may have a precedent here, the psychologist mentioned. In many ways, the mind remains poorly understood. However, if something similar has occurred before, it's plausible it could happen again. I frowned. He reassured, I wouldn't worry too much. With the love and attention of these 3 lovely ladies, even if something were to happen again, I believe you will be well taken care of. We conversed for a few more minutes before he excused himself. I also found myself fatigued, which might seem odd for someone who had just slept for the past 2 weeks, but I was. So I sent all 3 girls home to rest and informed them they could visit me tomorrow to ensure I was all right. Over the next 2 days, I eased back into life. Tina brought me a work laptop and a few simple tasks to complete, with instructions only if I felt bored. Rhonda visited primarily to review her revised divorce documents, and to have me sign some papers so she could proceed with ending my marriage to Annie. Rhonda also brought along a young detective, Karen Hill. Detective Hill conducted an hour-long interview with me regarding my experience that night with Annie. She thanked me and informed Rhonda and me that her report would be ready in a few days. I wasn't certain if we were planning to file a complaint against Annie eventually. However, Rhonda instructed me to leave everything to her, kissed me on the forehead, and departed. On the second day, afternoon, after waking up from what Sally dubbed my checkout, I was discharged to return home. Sally accompanied me, and I was surprised to find Tina waiting at the door. She assisted Sally in guiding me to her large suburban SUV. Tina stayed for dinner that night. We opted for takeout, and she pitched in to clean up before staying to watch TV with us for a couple of hours. When she left, Sally hugged her and made sure I walked her to her car. Tina, thank you so much for everything you've done these past few weeks. I don't know how I can repay you. Well, in a few weeks, when you're feeling back on your game, you can take me out for dinner and dancing. I blushed. Here I was, just an afternoon out of the hospital, and the woman whose kiss had awakened me was asking me out. But she was attractive, and according to Annie, I was to be a single man again. Okay, next Friday night after work. That gives me almost 2 weeks to get myself back to normal. She nodded and gave me a warm hug. It lingered a little longer, and I sensed a deeper meaning. As she got into her car, I found it amusing that for a moment I wondered about the name of the woman I had been married to for almost 25 years. For the next few days, Sally, Rhonda, and Tina hovered around me, ensuring I was all right. It was comforting to be cared for in such a way. However, the news Rhonda brought me that Friday afternoon caught all of us a little off guard. This afternoon, Annie got arrested, she announced. What happened? I inquired. Well, after your statement to the police at the hospital, they issued an arrest warrant for Annie on grounds of mental cruelty to a person with a disability. This is because you were mentally disabled and unable to defend yourself at the time. Also, she left you unattended for an unspecified period, which adds to her troubles, she explained. What does this mean for the divorce? Tina, who had joined us again for dinner, asked that evening. She had her 8-year-old daughter, Clarice, with her, who was watching a Disney movie in the lounge room while we conversed. First, with Monday marking my return to work, Tina would see me then. However, I was starting to grasp that she was seeking more than just an efficient number cruncher in the office. I found myself not objecting to the idea of Tina and picturing her, contemplating what lay beneath those nicely fitting clothes she wore whenever she visited. Rhonda grinned. It's likely going to tilt a few things in Arthur's favor. I'm advocating for a 50-50th split of the bank accounts in the house. I know we could aim for more given the circumstances, but I reckon Arthur would want to be fair. I nodded. Annie won't be able to touch any of the bonus money she tried to extract from you, Tina. I filed a case against her for extortion alongside the mental cruelty charge. It won't do much except prevent her from accessing what isn't rightfully hers. She'll probably be out in a couple of days, none the worse for wear, and likely back with her wretched soulmate. What I aim to do is expedite the divorce using Arthur's hospitalization and recovery as a pretext. Then, depending on her reaction, I have plans in motion. I'll ensure Arthur doesn't lose anything he shouldn't, she said, smiling. So how long will the divorce take, Aunt Rhonda? Sally inquired. Assuming everything goes smoothly, it should take around 3 months. After that, if Annie decides to contest anything, I'll bring in reinforcements, which will prolong the process but inflict more damage on her, Rhonda explained. That evening, as I escorted Tina to her car, Sally assisted Clarice into the back seat of the large Suburban. Tina embraced me once again and surprised me with a quick kiss, reminiscent of the other day. Arthur, I know you're married and you're a man of honor, so I won't rush things. But I want to lay claim to you now and let you know that I desire you. I've wanted you for a long time, of course, but I'd never pursue a married man or disrespect someone's marital vows. I've experienced that myself, and I wouldn't want to inflict that on someone else, even if their marriage is in trouble, Tina expressed sincerely. For a moment, I gazed into her deep blue eyes, brushed a strand of her dark hair from her face, and then leaned in to kiss her. Instead of a tender kiss, it became one filled with passion, lasting perhaps 30 seconds. I sensed the mutual connection between us. When I pulled back, Tina's eyes were closed, and she ran her tongue over her lips, savoring our kiss. I grinned. Consider that my acknowledgement of your claim. We glanced at the girls, both of them giggling at our kiss. Clarice was clapping, and Sally sported a huge grin. As Tina and Clarice drove off, Sally hugged me, and we waved goodbye. The following months were quite a ride. On one hand, Annie wanted a speedy divorce, but on the other, she wasn't content with the settlement. It seemed Paul was calling the shots, convincing her she deserved the lion's share of the assets. He was feeding her lies, and deep down she must have realized it after so many years of marriage. As her settlement demands grew more absurd, Rhonda had a single conversation with Annie's lawyer, and whatever was said put an end to all objections overnight. Tina and I went on dates every Friday night, while Sally began babysitting Clarice, picking her up from school and looking after her, giving Tina and me time for dinner, coffee, and entertainment. Though we never went beyond holding hands and kissing, I had a feeling the night my divorce finalized would be unforgettable. Back at work now, things were going smoothly. While we were a successful financial organization, we weren't in the big leagues. We all did our jobs, were well compensated, and enjoyed each other's company. I think the staff caught on to Tina and me becoming an item at some point, although everyone was happy for us. I had to dial back my usual antics. My direct manager, who reported to Tina, made sure to remind me of appropriate workplace behavior, considering I was essentially dating his boss. About 3.5 months later, we received a notification that the divorce would be finalized 1 week from the upcoming Thursday. There were no court proceedings. However, Annie had requested a meeting to discuss matters before the final decree. I agreed to meet the day before, and we arranged for her to visit the house to speak with both Sally and me. I had taken the afternoon off from work and prepared lamb chops and gnocchi in a burnt butter sauce for the three of us. It was a favorite meal for all of us, and I hoped it would help ease any potential awkwardness during our conversation. That evening, Sally arrived home around 5:30, went to shower and change, and just before 6, the doorbell rang, signaling Annie's arrival at the front door. I haven't described Annie's appearance in some time, but perhaps I should now, with a before and after perspective. Before everything unfolded a few months ago, Annie was an attractive mid-40s housewife. She had cropped, shoulder-length brown hair, a curvy figure typical of a mother, and although carrying a few extra pounds, she was still quite attractive, with a well-proportioned 34C bust and an appealing rear. She was an attractive wife. Unfortunately, the woman standing before me now was almost unrecognizable. Annie had gained a significant amount of weight, developed jowls under her chin and puffy cheeks. Her stomach, which had previously had a slight mom belly, now sagged over her pants, and her once curvy posterior had expanded. Furthermore, she was dressed in loose-fitting clothes that concealed even more. Now, I have nothing against people of larger size, but that wasn't the Annie I knew. I think my surprise at her physical transformation was evident on my face, although Annie made no comment about it, merely grimacing in response. Hello, Annie. Please, come in, I greeted. As we entered the kitchen, I offered her a glass of wine, which she accepted, and we engaged in small talk for a few minutes. She inquired about work and my well-being, while I skipped the inquiry about her health. It's what Paul wants. He didn't like how thin I was, so we've been working on bulking me up. She addressed the unspoken question. I frowned. For over 25 years, I had cherished this woman. Despite her actions, a lingering concern for her health remained, albeit greatly diminished. You don't approve, do you? She looked at me. No, Annie, I don't. When we were together, you were a healthy size, but I'll be honest, I'm taken aback by your appearance. You don't seem well, and if I weren't so hurt by what you did, I'd be more concerned about your health and try to help, I expressed. But you don't care, do you? Her expression fell. You and Sally, you're happy and healthy without me here. Well, there's a part of me that cares, but when you walked out of here and practically left me for dead. I trailed off, shrugging while she sighed. I deserve that. I did a terrible thing, didn't I? No, Mother, Sally interjected, appearing fresh from the shower. You did a freaking horrible thing. You single-handedly tore apart a happy family, then walked out without a care in the world, and I, for one, can't understand why Dad agreed to let you come here tonight. Sally, calm down, I intervened. Your mother knows the situation we're in and how unhappy we all are. She requested this meeting tonight, so I thought the least we could do is be mature and hear her out. Sally wasn't pleased. As far as I could tell, like me, she hadn't spoken to her mother since that momentous day. The way my daughter was glaring at her mother, this situation wouldn't end well for anyone. It was time to steer the conversation elsewhere. Attempting a cheerful tone, I suggested, tough discussions aren't ideal right before dinner, so let's eat first. I served dinner, and though no one spoke, there were numerous glances exchanged across the table. Sally maintained a steady glare at her mother throughout the meal. After dinner, I cleared the table, and Annie requested to speak to Sally alone. No way. You can say whatever you want to me with both of us present, Sally retorted firmly. I felt torn, but it was evident Sally was resolute about not being left alone with her mother. Annie seemed to sense that too. The look in her eyes mirrored what her mother had done to me on that fateful night. She acquiesced. Annie took a deep breath, hesitant to discuss matters in front of me, but she addressed Sally. Well, Sally, I wanted to ask for your forgiveness for what happened that night. I didn't handle things properly, and despite everything, I don't want to estrange my daughter forever. Glancing at me, Annie added, There's more, but I'd prefer to discuss it in private without your father present. Sorry, Mom, but if you can't say it to both of us, then I don't want to hear it, Sally declared. Before Annie could respond, Sally stood up and left the room, slamming her bedroom door shut moments later. I hope that would go better, Annie murmured softly, more to herself than to me. I think, considering the circumstances, it went rather smoothly, I replied, letting her know I understood. Really? Annie sounded surprised. Yes, really, I sighed, continuing. Annie, you need to realize that at this moment, nobody in this house holds much affection for you. She started to reply, but I raised my hand, signaling her to let me finish and lay everything out. First, you engaged in a long-term carnal affair with someone, then concealed it from both Sally and me. Next, you served me with divorce papers out of the blue, and when I entered what Sally refers to as checkout mode, you proceeded to yell, scream, and then slap me. Annie appeared stunned, like a deer caught in headlights. Yes, I remember that, and I recall most of that time until shortly after you first slapped me. But let's continue. At some point, you abandoned me when I was unresponsive, leaving me there until Sally arrived home and discovered me in the same state, I recounted. Annie's expression turned to panic. When Sally calls you, you show no concern for me. Despite your daughter being visibly distressed about her father, you never once inquire about my well-being until tonight. You make unreasonable demands of my workplace, and upon entering here, it's still all about you. You asked Sally for forgiveness, yet you have not apologized to her at any point. I paused briefly, hoping my words would resonate. Yes, Annie, with all of that considered, I think things went quite well. Annie's gaze shifted to the floor, tears welling in her eyes. They hadn't yet fallen, but they lingered threateningly. I couldn't discern whether they were for Sally, myself, or simply a reflection of her own emotions. Continuing, I stated, "Now our divorce will be finalized tomorrow, and unless you have anything further to add, I believe we have fulfilled your request for a final meeting." I walked to the door and opened it. Annie glanced at me before exiting. Once outside, she turned to look at me. "Arthur, we did have some good years, didn't we?" "Yes, Annie, most of our time together was incredible. You were an exceptional lover, a devoted wife, and a loving mother. I'm not sure what this Paul character has done to you, but I don't see the woman I fell in love with in the person standing before me. All I see is someone who seems lost, manipulated into becoming overweight, self-centered, and caring more about what others can provide for you than the people themselves." Once again, she lowered her gaze to her feet. "You truly mean that, don't you, Arthur?" "Yes, I do," I affirmed. She turned to leave but hesitated, looking utterly broken this time. "Arthur, about the house. Paul told me I needed to ask." So, that was the purpose of her visit. It wasn't about reconnecting with her family, it was solely about money. I chuckled, leaving Annie puzzled by my reaction. "Go tell your soulmate that you'll have your share of the savings and the equity from this house transferred to the bank account your lawyer provided to Rhonda by this time. Tomorrow." "And Annie?" She glanced at me. "Protect that money from Paul or you won't have it for long." Update: the next morning marked the final decree and Annie and I were officially no longer husband and wife. There was a small twinge of sadness within me, but it was fleeting. Mostly, I felt content. The past few months had been challenging for everyone. Now, at 48 years old, I felt liberated, knowing I still had much life left to live. Rhonda phoned to inform me that pizza was on her tonight at my place. During lunch at the office, Sally dropped by. We reminisced about happier times with her mother when we were a complete family. Despite Sally's dislike for her mother, I could sense she missed the woman she once was. Truthfully, I did too. We shared many good years together. As Sally left, there seemed to be a silent exchange between her and Tina. Not long after, I was summoned to Tina's office. She closed the door and then kissed me passionately, as if the sun might never rise again. I must admit I responded in kind. "Can I claim you as mine now, Arthur?" Tina asked. I felt a sore spot on my neck, likely from a bruise forming where she had just kissed me moments before. "I think you may have already done that." That evening's dinner was delightful, with Sally, Rhonda, Tina, and Clarice all joining in to celebrate my newfound freedom from Annie. Later that Friday night, after the girls were in bed, Tina and I consummated our relationship. I must have done something right, because throughout the weekend, Tina seemed a bit sore whenever she sat down, but her eyes burned with a fiery passion that I knew was reserved for me alone. 6 months later, we tied the knot in a beautiful ceremony by a local lake, with many of our colleagues in attendance. Though we initially planned to marry later, we decided to move the date up to coincide with the arrival of Sally and Clarice's new little brother. Update: 5 years had passed, and Sally, her boyfriend Tina, and I were enjoying dinner at a local restaurant when 5-year-old Keegan posed a question. "Daddy, who is that lady who keeps staring at us?" Turning to look, we spotted Annie sitting across the room. She had noticeably lost weight and appeared discontent. Since the divorce, we hadn't seen or heard from her, and she hadn't attempted to contact Sally. Excusing myself from the table, I approached her. "Hi, Annie." "Hi, Arthur." She glanced down at her chicken salad, replying, "You were right, Arthur. You were right about him. Paul convinced me I was his soulmate, and that you meant nothing to him. But when I did receive the money up front, he persuaded me to gain weight because he loved me and preferred overweight women. After receiving the divorce settlement, you advised me not to give it to him, but I didn't listen. He squandered it in 6 months and then abandoned me. Though I was still upset with her, her story lacked the happy ending mine had. Since then, I've spent every moment trying to rebuild the confidence he shattered and reclaim some semblance of my former self," she confessed, holding back tears as she looked at me. After all these years, that look resembled the Annie I once knew. "Arthur, I'm so sorry. I treated you terribly because I thought Paul knew things you didn't. I abandoned the man who truly loved me, leaving you unresponsive." She paused, gripping the edge of the table. "You could have died because of what I did. I know you can never forgive me, but I want to apologize," she said, tears streaming down her face. To my surprise, Sally had joined us, standing beside me, witnessing her mother's apology. She gave me a tired smile, took my hand, and extended her other hand to her mother. Seeing Sally do this, Annie panicked and tried to leave, but Sally stopped her. "Mom, stop, you." "Don't need to leave," Sally said firmly as she slid into the booth next to Annie. Sally and I joined her. I glanced at Tina, who nodded in agreement. For the next hour, mother and daughter talked, shedding many tears, but for the first time, they were tears of healing, not hurt. Once they had caught up, Sally and I reintroduced Annie to everyone else. She seemed uneasy when Keegan called her Auntie Annie. From that day on, we gradually welcomed Annie back into our lives. Sally and her mother started meeting for coffee every week or two, and trust slowly grew between them. By the time Sally got married, Annie had the chance to be the mother of the bride. Tina occasionally invited Annie over for dinner at our house. At first, I suspected Tina did it to show Annie what she had lost and Tina had gained by marrying me, but over time, the two women formed an odd kind of friendship that I never fully understood. Rhonda, however, never forgave Annie for the pain she caused me, though she remained polite when they encountered each other. With Tina's approval, Annie and I engaged in some post-marriage counseling. We addressed many of the issues from our past, spanning over 5 years ago. The counselor speculated that Annie might have been experiencing hormonal imbalances, but Annie vehemently rejected this notion. No, I threw away the most precious things in my life that day. I had a loving husband and a daughter who wanted to be with me. No hormonal imbalance can justify how I destroyed everything good in my life for someone who was nothing but trouble in bed and had an inadequate appendage, she remarked with a sweet smile directed at me. Arthur and Sally deserve better from me, she admitted tearfully, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. It took me years to reconnect with them. I thank God every day that Arthur has allowed me back into his life, and Tina too. She blushed, acknowledging Tina's warmth towards her despite everything. She had every reason to hate me, yet she has always treated me kindly. I got lucky, losing everything I discarded, and I will bear that burden for a long time. Annie gained more from those counseling sessions than I did. It was reassuring to confirm that neither Sally nor I were responsible for Annie's decision to leave us, and she was right. Tina had lifted us up and forged a stronger family bond. They say people pay for their mistakes eventually, and Paul did. He moved to another state and once again attempted to manipulate a married woman for her money. This time, however, the woman's husband caught Paul in the act and took matters into his own hands, rendering Paul incapable. The husband received a year sentence, but if Rhonda's rumors were accurate, he might be released sooner. Tina and I are still deeply in love. I never imagined I could love anyone as much or as deeply as I did Annie. But Tina proved me wrong. She not only gave me her love, but also her soul, wholeheartedly. We continue to work together in her company, and I'm still in the same job. While we have our ups and downs, we always prioritize communication when it matters. Her physique remains remarkable, and we still make love frequently. We've even indulged in love-making moments in exotic locations while on vacation. Often just one glance is enough to lead us to lock the bedroom door and passionately indulge in each other. Once, after we had finished making love, showered, and dressed, we entered the kitchen to find Sally and Annie engaged in conversation. We had recently learned that Sally was expecting, sparking excitement as the girls discussed the arrival of my first grandchild. My goodness, Sally, you'd think these two were teenagers with the way they behave. Tina, you'll have to let me in on your secret to keeping Arthur so lively. Maybe I can get some tips to keep Fred on his toes, Sally teased amidst laughter. I blushed. Annie had been casually dating lately, but nothing serious until Fred entered the picture. Mom, let them be. We all know that Dad has been on a mission since you know, Sally teased mischievously, her eyes twinkling. Annie hesitated while Sally laughed and Tina blushed. I simply leaned back, smirked at my girls, and felt myself stirred again by Tina's presence. Eventually, I excused myself, making my way back to the bedroom with Tina following shortly after, locking the door behind her.
Caught wife cheating with coworkers, served divorce papers, got her fired, and crushed her in court. I, 45 male, have been married to my wife, 42 female, for about 18 years now. She works in marketing at the regional branch of a well-known company, and I work in a senior role at a software company. We've both been relatively career-focused go-getters, and I think that's part of what drew us to one another. You likely won't be surprised to hear that we don't have any children, but we've never really felt like we wanted them, and I personally don't think anyone should take the decision to have kids lightly. In a marriage as long as ours, we've never had any issues regarding unfaithfulness, which is something I've always been thankful for. I've always felt like we've been too busy climbing the ladder to be fooling around. That was likely a stupid assumption because I know that anyone who wants to cheat can make time for it if they really want to. But there simply wasn't any reason for me to suspect her of infidelity, and I used that notion to buttress my peace of mind. The worst part is that until it happened, I didn't even know better. There were literally no signs, as far as I know. Maybe if I paid more attention, I would have seen it, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The entire thing started when my wife got a promotion at work about a year ago. She works extremely hard and has been with her company for over a decade. She came back one day to tell me she got a major promotion and was now in an executive position. That was huge because, as I've said, we've always been very career-focused, and while there were signs she was going to be chosen for the promotion, we simply weren't sure. So it was huge when it was confirmed, The position came with new responsibilities, but it also came with a massive pay increase, which was, of course, one of the best parts. Now, for the most part, nothing really changed. She was keeping slightly later nights, though nothing too crazy. And if you're a top marketing executive, it doesn't seem surprising that your hours might be a bit longer, at least in the initial period as you get acclimated to the role. There were days when she'd get back early, which was nice, but for the most part, instead of getting back around 6 p.m. like she used to, it'd be like 7:30 or 8. I told her to take it easy every once in a while, but we're both workaholics, so I knew my words wouldn't change much. It was about 2 weeks ago that things changed quite a lot. It started with a message that somebody sent me on LinkedIn, and I'm always ready to answer messages because it's all about business for me. The message was simply a greeting, though, and I checked the person's profile before I responded. They worked at the same company that my wife did, though their role was clearly junior. It was a lady, so I'll just say her name was Suzette. I responded to her with a similar greeting, knowing she'd eventually come out about what she wanted, but it wasn't until the next day after work, hours before she actually replied. She asked if I was my wife's husband, and I told her that I was. At that point, I knew it had nothing to do with business, and my first thought was that this was some pathetic girl trying to poach a married man or something. I mean, I really couldn't come up with another reason why someone like her was messaging me and leading with a question like that. I answered in the affirmative, though. I really would like to talk to you about something private, but I don't know if you're open. It's about your wife, was added in a separate message. At that point, I started to feel very anxious. I thought that something might have been wrong with my wife, or she might have had an accident, but this message was sent since yesterday, so it was definitely something else. I started to wonder whether my wife was too combative and bossy at work and was essentially a bully. That was eventually what I settled on. She must want to report my wife to me, perhaps before trying to report her to HR. So I told her that I was open to hearing what she had to say. She proposed a meeting in person at a neutral spot, but I really didn't feel comfortable with that, so I told her to say what she wanted to say right there. I needed to have written proof of whatever it was she wanted to say. She seemed hesitant, but eventually agreed. She sent me a paragraph, and it was very shocking to read. I don't know if you're the kind of person who prefers ignorance or whether you would want to know. But I know with certainty that your wife is sleeping with some of the junior employees. Maybe you both have an arrangement, and if so, please forgive me for intruding, but I think it wouldn't be fair for you to be in the dark about this. I really beg that you don't mention my name if you do decide to confront her. I know this could cost me my job, but I'm really just trying to do the right thing, and I hope you can appreciate that. I read that message over about 5 times before what it was saying actually started to sink into my head. She was saying that my wife was sleeping with junior coworkers. Was that something I could even believe? I hadn't seen a single sign of that. She never seemed to smell like anyone's perfume, and she never acted even mildly different when she'd returned from work. To be honest, the only thing I could point to was her coming home later than she used to, and that certainly could align with this new theory. It took me quite some time before I replied to her. I told her I was grateful that she told me and that her admission was going to be saved with me. About 10 minutes later, a bunch of questions started jumping into my head. How many employees? When did this start? Did they do things at work? How does she even know about it? I asked her every single one of these questions in a single message. I don't know. For sure. But at least 2 because I overheard them talking about it. That's how I found out, and maybe it was some kind of inside joke, but they sounded serious and they tend to work late nights. I assumed they might be doing things in the building, but I don't have an answer for that. I heard their conversation about 2 months ago, and it's been eating me up. I saw her whispering to one of these guys somewhere discreet, and that's what brought it back to the forefront of my mind. I just had to say something, and I'm sorry that it took me so long to. I report directly to her, so I feel like a traitor. I don't hate her or dislike her, but it just wasn't right. Honestly, most of me believed this lady, but I couldn't understand why. Maybe because it just seemed so improbable that someone would go to these lengths to lie to me. Could this be some workplace rival trying to ruin her family life? I couldn't know, and because I personally hadn't even had an inkling of a doubt in my wife, part of me didn't want to believe it. But for some reason, it seemed credible. I thanked the lady quite extensively, and I told her I would act on the information as I thought appropriate, but she would be left out of it. I wanted to tell my wife about it and see her reaction or simply confront her, but it was going to be so easy for her to deny it. It was clear as day that my best choice was to see what I could dig up. That way, I'd either be able to feel like there was no evidence and debunk what the lady told me, or I'd find something to corroborate it. And then I'd take things from there. So I decided to be patient and wait for a good opportunity to do my snooping. When my wife came home that night, things were normal, and I did my best to act as normal as possible with her. It wasn't too hard because I wasn't entirely convinced. My chance to snoop around came about 4 days later when my wife went to the salon to get her hair done. She almost always went around with her laptop, but in this case, she didn't. Her password isn't a secret to me, so I was able to log right in, and since she uses a MacBook, I was able to look at her messages. Based on what this lady had told me, I was looking for conversations that seemed to be with younger men who were employees of hers. I could hardly recognize any of the names though, so I decided to simply go through as many of those messages as possible. I saw a preview of a message with the text, "I'll call you when I get back so you," and the sender, DoorDash. I could have laughed despite myself, so I opened it up and started to go through the entire thing. Apparently, she had saved the contact, which belonged to some guy called John, as DoorDash to make things less suspicious if I just happened to see a message from him pop up. At that moment, I was absolutely furious, and by the time I got to the point where they were sending steamy texts back and forth, I almost lost my mind. He had sent her pictures. She hadn't sent him any, and she responded very positively to his. At one point, I realized I had been staring blankly at the screen for a few minutes. Honestly, it's hard for me to express how heartbreaking it was to discover that. I decided to leave the chat, but I made sure to record as much as I could as evidence. After that, I went back to the chat to continue scrolling through and looking for other people she was having affairs with. I'm not going to bore you all, but there were 2 other employees. I could tell they were employees because work was mentioned in about 5% of the messages, while the rest was just explicit stuff. Judging by their images, none of these men could have been over the age of 30, which made things a lot worse in my head. I took all the evidence I could gather, and honestly, I'm quite baffled about what to do next. Is it as easy as just confronting her and then going for a divorce? Is that really all I'm going to do? This is a woman who comes home every day, kisses and hugs me, and acts like there's absolutely nothing wrong. We've slept together several times since her affair started, and now I know it's an absolute priority that I get tested. I'm going to do that, but I want to figure something out, and I need opinions on it. Should I just leave it at divorce, or should I hit her harder than that? Should I find a way to really hurt her because this is the worst form of betrayal, and I genuinely can't stomach her anymore? Edit. I'm just finishing a long day of work, and I appreciate all the advice and comments I've received regarding my predicament. Someone said that I only have one chance to get back at her because once I've divorced her and left those years behind, I won't be able to act on my pain. I know this isn't something that I'll stop feeling anytime soon, so I'm ready to make sure I use this chance to get back. I'm not going to stoop to the level of cheating back. I don't even have the urge to do that. I'll figure something out though, and I will update you all when I get to that point. Well, it sounds like your wife really did take her job to heart when she said she was climbing the corporate ladder. I mean, who knew she was so committed to networking in more ways than one? On a serious note though, discovering something like this must feel like getting a software update that crashes your entire system. I guess she wasn't just debugging code at work, huh? At least now you have concrete evidence that she's been multitasking, balancing spreadsheets and steamy texts. If you decide to confront her, maybe ask if this was her version of work-life balance gone terribly wrong. And hey, at least you found out now instead of being blindsided later. Who knows, maybe you'll get a CEO of revenge promotion out of this. After all, she did show you the importance of seizing opportunities even if it's just in the wrong department. Update. Hey everyone, I wrote an earlier post about my wife, who was promoted and started cheating on me with her junior employees, about 3 of them that I know about. It's been several months since then, and I forgot about updating you all in the midst of all the drama in my life. But now that things are over, trust me, it came to mind, and I'm here to tell you all how things played out. It's all good news. So when I finally decided that I was going to confront my wife about the entire thing, I made sure to go and get an STD test done first. They found gonorrhea. Fortunately, I was asymptomatic, and I was given a prescription to get it treated. I was super pissed off though, because she's the only woman I have slept with since we got married, so I certainly didn't get it from anyone but her, and she likely got it from one of her new sexual partners. It was at that point that I was certain I was going to confront her. When she arrived home that night, I was in the living room, and I asked her to sit down before she could even take off her coat. She seemed concerned, but I don't think she knew exactly what was going on at that point. "I know you've been cheating on me," was exactly how I said it to her, and I watched as she deflated and held her face in her hands. I mentioned the names of the people she was cheating on me with, at least the ones I had confirmed. I basically told her everything I knew, though I didn't tell her how I found out. "One of your boyfriends gave you gonorrhea, which you gave to me too." I remember holding up the test in front of her face, and she peeked at it before hiding her face again. Honestly, it was pissing me off. I sat there waiting for her to say something. She wasn't crying, and I knew that she had heard everything I said. It took about 3 minutes before she looked up, shook her head, and said, "I'm sorry, I'm really sorry." The way she said it would have worked if she had scratched my dream car, but not for cheating on me with multiple men. I don't even have any excuse. I can't defend myself. I thought you would never find out. I don't even know how you found out. Right now, I hate myself for doing this to you. I'm so sorry. Towards the end, her voice started to quiver, but genuinely, it didn't mean very much to me. I could see she was crying at this point, but she wasn't sobbing or anything. It didn't move me. "You're not sleeping here tonight. Find somewhere else. I'm going to be looking for a divorce lawyer first thing in the morning, and I suggest you do too so we can make this fast. It was only at that point that she said the only thing remotely close to begging. "Baby, we've been together nearly 20 years, can't we?" And then she trailed off. I think she wanted to ask if we could work things out, but I think she recognized that wasn't possible considering how deep her transgressions were. In response, I only told her that I'd wait in the living room while she packed any of the things she needed for the next week. We arranged for her to get more of her stuff later. She stood up and went to the bedroom after that. And that was all that was made out of our conversation, probably the most mature way to react to an F-up of that magnitude. She eventually left the house, and the next phase was the divorce stage. We both got lawyers, the papers were served and signed very quickly, and we eventually got into the proceedings. Fortunately for me, I had all the evidence of her infidelity, including my STD test, and it was presented in a very effective way by my divorce lawyer, who was a total rock star. Things went on for quite a bit but ultimately ended in my favor. Because my ex-wife's promotion meant she started earning significantly more than me, I ended up getting a pretty nice alimony judgment. Even though I really do not need it, I'll use it to pay for a hobby or two when it comes. The house was a tough one because we co-owned it, but her higher income meant she'd be better set to find a new residence. I got that one too. We each had cars and she kept hers naturally, but there was no easy way for me to get that from her. As things went, that was how we finally split ways for good, and I was very happy with what I got. I wasn't done though. I really wanted to go after her affair partners, but after really thinking about it, I decided not to. These people were employees, and it was hard to be sure they weren't coerced into it at the start, regardless of how much they seemed to be enjoying it later on. She took advantage of them as their boss, and I decided it was too messy and not worth the effort to get on them. However, regarding her, it was easy for me to make a report to HR at her company from an anonymous address. I had to let them know that one of their top-level executives was coercing junior employees into sleeping with her, and I recommended they start an investigation. That happened, and long story short, she was found to be guilty of the allegations. Several junior employees directly beneath her were questioned, and there seemed to be a fourth person that I never found out about. The lady who had exposed the affairs to me in the first place was feeding me insider updates, because all I got officially was an email telling me an investigation was commencing, and an investigation had been completed. Her punishment? She lost her job. I know it won't be too hard for her to find a new job based on merit, but with sexual misconduct allegations following her around, she's not going to have an easy time. As far as I know, she's still searching up until now, and yes, I know it jeopardizes my alimony, but I really didn't need it to survive. Plus, she's got more than enough money in the bank to still fulfill her payments. If she doesn't, I don't mind going to court for her to figure it out somehow. That's not my problem. We've probably spoken twice since the divorce, and it was all about formalities related to splitting our lives up for good. I personally don't want to have to talk to her ever again, and the way things are going, I probably won't need to. Honestly, life is good as it is. And although revenge doesn't completely erase the pain of being cheated on by your longtime wife, it does a hell of a good job at it. It feels good, and I'm glad I went through with it. Not only did you manage to catch her red-handed with the junior team, but you also got a surprise gonorrhea delivery from her DoorDash service. I guess in her new executive role, she really mastered the art of employer relations. As for her post-disease delivery job hunt, I guess her new skill set includes executive-level networking. Though I doubt her LinkedIn endorsements will list expertise in workplace fraternization. Kudos on the HR report move. She might have lost her job, but at least now she's got a glowing recommendation for her next one. Great at climbing corporate ladders, not so great at keeping them straight. Seriously though, it sounds like you've navigated this with a blend of clarity and just the right amount of revenge. Here's to hobbies funded by alimony and a life without gonorrhea. What do you think of Ope's revenge? What would you have done? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and thank you for joining us today.
I'm not the type of person who wants to see everything fall apart and burn. When I noticed something was wrong with my wife, I didn't hesitate to talk to her about it. I asked her why she had stopped talking to me, hugging me, and being close to me. I even asked her why she seemed uncomfortable with my touch. It wasn't easy to get her to open up at first, but eventually she did. And what I heard broke my heart. She said she didn't feel like I was enough for her, that she had to do everything herself and couldn't rely on me. She felt like she had to make all the decisions and handle everything, including the kids. She even said that maybe she would be better off alone. Hearing all of this was a shock, but I didn't want to fight with her. I love her so much that I accepted what she said and told her I understood her pain. I promised her I would work on my behavior so she wouldn't have to stress about it. I just want to make things right because she means the world to me, but it's tough, you know? Despite all that, I do. I still have my own thoughts that keep me awake at night. That's actually why I ended up seeking support from this group. Because the accusations my wife is making against me just aren't true. At least not from my perspective. I genuinely believe I'm a good husband who meets the norm. I work around 8 or 9 hours from home, and when I'm finished, I dedicate myself to taking care of my boys. I play with them, feed them, take the older one to swim lessons, and tuck them in at bedtime. I'll even wake up in the middle of that night if they need me. And it's not just about the kids. I also handle household chores, the dishes, groceries, and some cleaning. Although my wife thinks I'm not efficient enough at it, so she prefers to take over. I also take care of the car and other responsibilities related to our new house. I do all of this to make her life easier because I know how challenging it can be with 2 little boys. But the thing is, I'm not always the type of person who's constantly proactive. You know, there are those people who can't sit on the couch for 5 minutes without thinking about what to do next, what needs fixing, what business to start, what chores are left to do. My father-in-law is like that, but I'm not. I have my own unique way of doing things, and I believe that's okay too. At the end of the day, when the kids are finally asleep, work is checked off, and the house is in order, I look forward to unwinding with a movie or some video games. I've never been the entrepreneurial type who wants to start my own business. I thrive when I'm given tasks to excel at in my field. There's nothing to be ashamed of. Plenty of people are like me. I'm not chasing some flashy career or dreaming of swimming in money. I'm just an ordinary guy. But things have been different lately. I've noticed my wife having issues with my approach, even though we've had 9 years of blissful marriage. It all came to a head in December, and since then I've been pushing myself to go against my natural personality. I've been doing extra groceries, fixing up things around the house, barely taking a moment to rest in the evenings. I thought she'd appreciate it, but her attitude towards me remained unchanged. So I mustered up the courage to confront her. My emotions running high, I looked her straight in the eye and asked her point blank, "Do you even want to save our marriage?" Her response hit me like a ton of bricks. I don't know, I couldn't believe it. Was she that clueless or just indifferent? I gritted my teeth and pushed on, asking her if she was willing to go to marriage counseling. And once again, she had the audacity to reply with that same infuriating answer. I don't know. I couldn't take it anymore. I snapped at her, telling her that this was not the time for indecision. Our kids could end up with divorced parents if we didn't act fast, and her lack of commitment was unacceptable. She finally agreed to go to therapy after much prodding, but true to form, she showed no interest in taking any initiative. I had to do all the legwork in finding a therapist myself. And during one of our counseling sessions, she dropped some brutal truths that cut me to the core. She said she only married me to impress her family and fit into their idea of a perfect happy family with beautiful children. She admitted that she was never truly in love with me but was merely enchanted by the idea of marriage. As if that wasn't enough, I later found out that she had met with her fellow priest to discuss our marriage behind my back. It was a betrayal that left me reeling with anger and hurt. But despite it all, I soldiered on and found a good therapist for us. We're now approaching our 3rd session, but it's been a rocky road. We learned that we have different love languages. I crave touch, while she prioritizes getting things done. It's been a constant struggle, and to make matters worse, she hasn't shown me any physical affection since we started counseling. No hugs, no touch, nothing. The therapist was taken aback when she heard that my wife and I hadn't slept in the same room for 6 whole months. My wife tried to explain it away, saying that she's been sharing the bed with the kids and there's simply no space for me. But the therapist didn't hold back. She bluntly told my wife that it's a terrible example to set for the kids, denying their own father access to the bedroom. She even suggested that we should go to IKEA and buy a single bed to put next to the big one. So I went ahead and did just that. I bought the bed, assembled it, and now I sleep there. But I still feel just as alone as before. My wife is all the way to the left, the boys are in the middle, and I'm stuck on the far right, feeling like an outsider in my own marriage. From the very beginning of this issue, my wife has been changing her story. Now she's saying that she's depressed from being stuck at home with the kids all the time. She's claiming that she said all those hurtful things because she was just too emotional. But I would never dream of saying anything like that to her, no matter how upset I am. So my wife went back to work, and we had to hire a nanny to handle the kids. The only change I noticed is that we started talking more. But I ain't just her buddy, I'm her husband too. And there's zero closeness between us, and it ain't looking like it's going to improve anytime soon. No signs of it. She doesn't give a duck about our marriage counseling sessions. I'm the one who has to keep setting them up. Things are much worse than I thought. My buddies were saying, "Dude, your wife is totally cheating on you." And at first, I thought it was like some sci-fi movie stuff. I didn't believe my wife would do that. But today, everything changed. I caught her red-handed by installing a voice-activated recorder in our car for just 3 days. She used the car to go to work and the gym, and bam, she called him or he called her twice. I heard every word of their video conversation on the phone and got all the evidence I need. They were talking about personal stuff like when my wife and I first met 9 years ago. You know, all that attraction, inside jokes and stuff. I haven't felt that with her in a long time. Believe it or not, they were planning a vacation together and she wants to visit him in July, giving him 2 years to move back to our country. I can't wrap my head around it. They were even discussing closeness details, and she straight up said she's leaving me to be with him. They were talking about their favorite positions, so you know they were real close. I listened to an hour-long recording of it all. I need to process it, and I'm meeting with an attorney next week. Thanks to my friend's suggestion, I wouldn't have bought that voice recording device if it wasn't for him. Someone might call me a moron for placing it in the car, but I don't care. I don't feel guilty. I can't stop thinking about my kids and what she's done. They've been up to something since last September, and it took me 2 months to notice changes in her behavior. Next week, I'll be taking care of my old father in another city for the entire week, so she'll use my home office. She'll probably be talking to him in my office. Should I place the recorder there for the next week, or do I have enough evidence already? Out of the blue, my wife tried calling her ex-boyfriend 4 times in a row at 10 p.m. I found out through an app that saved our numbers, showing all incoming and outgoing calls. Why would my wife, who never mentioned her ex before, suddenly be calling him persistently? It drove me insane, so I checked her iMessages on her laptop. After calling him 4 times, she sent him a message saying, "I'm not giving up until you actually answer and communicate with me in a respectful and civilized manner." I couldn't believe my eyes. I confronted her, and she denied it until I showed her the evidence. She admitted trying to reach her ex, but her story was convoluted. I'm uncertain about how to process this. It all happened when she started distancing herself from me. Her perspective is that it's not strange or negative for her to have kept it from me. It doesn't hold much significance to her. Any contact with an ex is a red flag for me, and it's unacceptable. Is she being unfaithful? Our closeness has been lacking for the past 6 months, which is exactly when these calls took place. Who is her AP after all? I now have concrete evidence that our issues aren't due to the reasons she's been telling everyone. The thing is, she doesn't know that I know. None of her family or friends are aware either. They all think we're just going through a temporary rough patch. She comes from a Catholic family with 3 sisters, attends church every Sunday, and we live in a small town with a population of 17,000. We recently built a house that's still unfinished. I discovered that she's planning to have me leave so that she can have time alone. Within 2 years, her AP will move to our small town to live with her in our house, along with our 2 young boys. She's hoping people will understand, claiming she needs a father figure for her kids. Interestingly, the AP is actually her first boyfriend, and they were together for 7 years before she married me. We've been together for 9 years. Although he lives abroad, he frequently visits our country. I won't let myself be manipulated that way. I've hired a lawyer and will be meeting with them soon. I have recordings that could potentially damage her reputation. My cheating wife didn't see my next move coming. I talked to my lawyer and got some eye-opening advice. Going all out and trying to ruin her life during the divorce wouldn't be the wisest move. We have kids, and I'll be co-parenting with her for the next 16 years, so I need to be mindful of that. Plus, I respect her family and don't want to involve them in the divorce proceedings as witnesses. Additionally, I don't have a chance of winning custody since the kids need to be with their mother in the small town an hour away from me in the capital city. I wouldn't even be allowed to sell our house because the kids need a decent place to live, and we don't have another option. The place they're staying at now is owned by her dad, so it's just a temporary arrangement. It sucks, but that's the reality in the Czech Republic, Europe. After our conversation, the lawyer sent her the divorce papers, set to be delivered right after Easter in the Czech Republic. Yesterday I had a day off, so I took care of my 1-year-old son while she worked in the capital city, about an hour away. Meanwhile, my brother helped me pack up my belongings from the apartment and load them into his car. To add to the chaos, the postman delivered the divorce papers. or an invitation to mediation so we could divide everything amicably. According to the papers, she's in a relationship with this guy, mentioning his first and last name, and that's apparently the reason for the divorce. But at least the evidence I have will be useful for child support and such. It'll be leverage in my favor. When she walked into the house, I confronted her, told her I knew everything, and insisted she contact my lawyer. Then I handed her the divorce papers and left to visit her parents. Naturally, she asked how I knew and denied everything. Her parents were shocked, but they believed me. I recorded the entire conversation, following my lawyer's advice. I asked if they thought I was a good husband and father, and they approved, so she can't use them as witnesses against me in court. They understood the gravity of what she had done and how it devastated our lives. I thanked them for their understanding and headed to the capital city. Meanwhile, I reached out to a friend who helped spread the news to her circle of friends. Guess what? 2 hours later, my brother-in-law called, saying she confessed to cheating with the AP, but conveniently forgot to mention any closeness with him. Classic. He filled me in on how everyone's on my side and how she destroyed our once perfect family. He then suggested everything could be saved because he cheated on his wife too, and now they're living happily. Hilarious, right? Like that's going to make me feel better. Then, to add to the circus, her father called, blaming her and saying the AP will never set foot in his house again. He cut off financial support for my soon-to-be ex-wife, tried calling the AP, but the guy didn't pick up. And in a grand finale of absurdity, he thinks it can all be saved. But hold on, there's more. Her sister sends me a text saying she's fully on my side, yet she believes the situation can be salvaged. It's good they're supporting me, but are they all delusional? It's ridiculous, as if this mess could be magically fixed. It's infuriating. I really don't think our relationship can be saved, and I'm quite certain about it. I worry others might think I lack concrete evidence for leaving her. They aren't aware of the specifics of the evidence I have. All they know is that it's some sort of tape. I've got recordings of her saying things like, "Make sure you can last longer than 3 seconds. When I come to visit you in Brussels, I'm curious if your dad's Johnson is as big as yours. I'll ask that woman how long your brother's Johnson is and let her know how big yours is. Oh, I love you so much. Well, I'm finally going to leave my husband. About time. Record yourself and send me a video. I want to see what I'm missing. Just showing you a glimpse of what your sad life without me will look like. Giving you a generous 2 years to figure out how to move back here." Crazy idea. So guess who's calling back now? Yep, my ex. Just like all my friends predicted after her family gave her an earful. She's been texting me, confessing she had no clue what she was doing. Life would be unbearable without me. I'm so sorry for everything I've done. I'm waiting with the kids for your grand comeback, blah, blah, blah. So my lawyer finally laid out the divorce terms I want, and now we're waiting for her lawyer's response. But in the meantime, my mother-in-law flooded my phone with texts complete with Christian links about forgiveness, convinced my wife's been possessed by some evil spirit. And if that wasn't enough drama, her sister jumped on the blame train, telling me I'm the one ruining the marriage. According to her, it's all my fault for being selfish. But wait for it. Now my wife's teary-eyed and apologetic, wishing she could turn back time. Suddenly, I'm the selfish villain destroying the marriage by divorcing her. Yep, it's all on me now. Like I'm the bad guy for wanting out. I felt guilty for a moment today, like it's all my fault. They really know how to sway me. But you know what? It's tough. But I'm not changing my mind. The divorce is happening no matter what. In the Czech Republic, kids as young as ours are expected to stay with their mother in case of a divorce. Since she lives an hour away in a small town and the kids have their kindergarten and nursery there, a 50-50 split isn't feasible. I'll be an every other weekend dad with some additional access whenever I want. It's sad and painful, but it is what it is. I've been thinking about this unusual idea of suggesting some terms to reconcile with her. I don't love her anymore, but I do it for the kids because I care about them a lot. It wouldn't be a marriage, more like a partnership with separate finances. She'd need to move from her hometown to the capital city where I live. Also, I'd insist on having GPS in her car even when she's older and can't drive. I'd check her phone daily, and in return, I get to go on dates with other girls for 7 months. I might even cheat during the relationship and not tell her. If she finds out, whatever. No marriage. Anyway, I don't really care. It's just an idea, nothing serious, and I probably won't go through with it. I'm just desperate to silence the family accusing me of abandoning the kids. What do you think? Crazy, right? But I don't have any other bright ideas now. Currently, I'm crashing at my parents' place, sleeping on the living room couch. The dining table has become my makeshift office entertainment center, and my clothes are scattered on chairs. I work from home for about 8 hours a day, then pitch in with chores for my elderly parents, who are 90 and 82 years old. I handle groceries and drive them to doctor appointments. Besides that, I try to hit the gym or catch a movie to distract myself from negative thoughts. I see my kids every weekend. My ex drops them off, and I drive them back. Just to clear things up, I did a paternity test, confirming the boys are mine. The divorce terms situation is messy now, and it's tough to predict how it'll play out. I'm crashing at my parents' place, and as a dad of 2 and a grown adult, I have no other place to go. So I'm asking for a decent amount of money from my wife. She's agreed to take over the mortgage for the house, but is offering only 1/3 of the money I'm asking for. She justifies it by saying that's my contribution to building the house. It's messy. I didn't cause this situation, but I need a place to live. Getting 1/3 of what I asked for won't cut it for buying a flat. The back and forth with our lawyers continues. She wants to keep the house, but she might be forced to sell it, which is what she should have done from the beginning. It'll be tough for her to manage the mortgage payments and pay me. We'll see how it pans out for child support. She's asking for more than reasonable, and we need to agree on that. On top of that, she insists I should be the one picking up the kids from the small town and driving them back at the end of the weekend. It's a lot of fuel and time on my part. In my opinion, it should be the other way around. She should be dropping them off, and I should drive them back. So you can see that she's the one responsible for all of this, but at the same time, she's ready to argue about the divorce terms. It's frustrating. My wife tried to convince me that she's remorseful and regrets what she's done. She told me she ended things with her affair partner, saw an exorcist, confessed to the affair details, and left it to God's hands. I laughed and told her I don't care about her priest. She should confess to me. I gave her a chance to come clean and asked her how many times she had been close with him. She denied it. Then I brought up the party she had with her work friends back in November and asked her why she rented an Airbnb for the night instead of staying at one of her friends' places. She went numb and couldn't find any words except for asking me why I keep torturing myself with it. I explained that if she truly felt remorseful, she wouldn't keep lying. 2 months after I left her, it was clear she wasn't being honest. I explained to her that for me, closeness over video chat is just as significant, and I'm aware that she had it with him. She couldn't even keep track of how many times she had done it with the AP. Then I confronted her, asking her how she envisions us getting back together. I pointed out how she would start a conversation with me and then lie in the very next moment. I asked her if she was aware that I would be checking her phone every day and what she thought about that. She snapped back, "That's not trust. That's just treating me like garbage, right?" At that moment, our son interrupted, and the conversation was wrapping up. I added, "Don't forget, it's not just me you cheated on, but also our 2 beloved boys." It devastated her, and she started yelling that I'd better not say anything like that again in front of our kids. It's funny. Her sister spilled the beans on how my wife acts sad and cries every day because of this situation. She's two-faced, acting all sad with the family but lying to me. She even said she could be with the affair partner and her family wouldn't care. As if I should be grateful she ended it with him and now she's in control. Seriously, divorce? After some lawyer discussions, we've agreed, and the divorce will be done soon. She gets the unfinished house, and the mortgage is all on her now. I want to clarify it's for the kids, not revenge for her cheating. Plus, I don't want to live in her small hometown, an hour away from the capital where I am now. However, I'm getting back what I invested in the house, and the amount is actually pretty good. Child support isn't bad, and we've agreed she drops the kids off in the capital every other weekend. I just have to drive them back. But honestly, seeing my kids only on weekends hurts so much. I can barely handle it. I can't bear the thought of my 1- and 3-year-old boys growing up without a father because of their mother. I wish I could have them with me, but Czech law doesn't allow it. I might have to start driving there midweek or find another way to make it work. As for her, she keeps saying she still loves me and wishes she could undo the past. She claims she suffers every day because of what she's done. She's softened to the point where she doesn't mind if I check her phone. It wouldn't make her feel bad anymore. She apologized to my parents and seemed genuinely sorry. She's willing to do whatever it takes to make things right. Now here's a shocker. Her affair partner got dumped, according to mutual friends. Can you believe it? He has a family in Brussels and didn't want to risk getting caught in this mess. It was all just a game for him, playing my wife. I'm moving on, not letting her toxic behavior drag me down. The divorce is happening and there's no going back. Good riddance to the cheater. I've got better things to focus on and a brighter future ahead. Life goes on, and I'm not wasting more time looking back at the mess she created. How can you tell if your wife is cheating on you? Did her mood suddenly change, or did she start going out in the evenings? Did she express a desire to have fun with her friends, or show any other unusual behavior worth noting? As for me, let's just say I had a strong intuition. When I got home from work, she was on the phone. The moment I walked in, she hastily said, "I have to go, he's home, bye," and immediately hung up, looking at me innocently. That triggered a terrible suspicion in me. I considered asking her about the call, but she could make up anything, right? Like chatting with a salesman about buying 2 massagers for the price of 1 for a cellulite treatment. Such thoughts didn't just pop into my head. There must have been a lingering doubt about my wife. I didn't like it, and I didn't want it to bother me every day. I'm not good with change. I prefer to stay out of something that's already working fine to avoid making it worse. Let me introduce myself and tell you about my family. I'm Ron, and Cindy and I have been married for 24 years. We have 4 children, 2 adults and 2 teenagers. We're not wealthy, but we make enough to live comfortably. Thankfully, we have no debts. Cindy and I own a cozy house with a paid-off mortgage. Our cars aren't new, but we don't have monthly payments. We might have a few small credit card debts, but that's about it. Overall, we are a typical American family, trying to live within our means. On weekdays, we work, eat, and take care of our home. The younger kids go to school, and on weekends, we occasionally go out together. Cindy and I try to keep up with our kids' interests, whether it's sports, art classes, scouting, or any other activity. Sometimes we even have family dinners around a common table, a rarity in these times. Our bed life is probably like most middle-aged couples. We make love once every 2 weeks or so. I might wish it were more frequent, but, it takes 2 to tango. Lately, Cindy hasn't been enthusiastic about that kind of closeness. That was a pun. Because of my supernatural intuition, I fear I have to be vigilant for any strange signs from her. It's like I don't trust her without any apparent reason. I'm hoping this nagging feeling in my stomach is just normal indigestion and not a sign of what I suspect. My main problem is that I'm not a detective or an expert. I'm just an average middle-aged man unfamiliar with hidden cameras, phone tapping, computer hacking, and other spy techniques you might have heard about. Moreover, I'm not wealthy enough to hire a private investigator to follow my wife, especially when I don't know where to look or what to look for. Cindy manages our finances, so I have no idea about her payments. If I start going through paperwork, she'll notice and want to know why I'm buried in bills. What am I supposed to tell her? "Honey, I've got a suspicious feeling in my stomach. Are you growing horns for me?" "Yeah," and she'll probably say, "Honey, I bet you'd rather go for a break than deal with that." A bit of family background. Our marriage appears quite ordinary, as it should be at our stage in life. I met Cindy in our early 20s, we dated for about a year, and then we got married every 2 years. She had a baby when we reached 4 children. Honestly, I got tired of babies popping out like moles in a slot machine, so I had a vasectomy after her last birth. One night, everyone in our house, 2 teenagers, my wife and I, had dinner together. The kids talked about their school day, and Cindy shared details about her part-time job at the library. After our 2 youngest started college, Cindy got bored being home alone, so she got a part-time job at the local library. Her schedule was irregular, making me wonder if the library was a place I should check out. But how was I supposed to do that? Taking a day off work to watch who goes in and out of the library isn't practical. Forget the library. I had a better idea. I could catch her at her women's card club tonight and start my private investigation after she left. To do that, I'd have to discreetly follow her in my trusty old pickup truck. I can't afford a rental car like husbands in stories about cheating wives. Anyway, Cindy left for the card club, and a few minutes later, I quietly slipped out. I knew where she was going since she told me and left a phone number. Unfortunately, I lost her car, so I drove to Marge's house where the poker tournament was supposed to happen. Arriving there, I saw Cindy's car among others in front of Marge's house. I waited, scanned the street, and got out of my pickup, parked a couple of houses away. I crept to a window and peeked inside, seeing 4 women at each of the 2 card tables, chatting, smoking, and occasionally bursting into laughter. Just cards, money, and 8 women having a good time. No debauchery. I was ready to intervene and put an end to what I assumed was wild behavior. But my investigation hit a snag, and as I backed up to my truck, I stepped in dog poop. "Great," I muttered, waddling sideways like a drunken crab with greased shoes toward the truck. Darn dogs and their owners who let them roam freely after feeding them, leaving the rest of us to deal with unexpected landmines. I had to spend about 10 minutes cleaning dog poop off my shoes before I could hop back into my truck. The stench lingered, so I rolled down all the windows, sped up, and made sure not to obstruct the inspector or risk a ticket for the foul-smelling environmental trail behind me. Despite the disastrous first attempt, I didn't give up. My gut feeling, like a reliable compass, insisted that betrayal was looming. Once home, shedding my soiled clothes, I headed to the laundry basket to inspect my wife's undergarments. Luckily, she hadn't done laundry this week. I checked her closet for revealing dresses and inappropriate clothes, then went through every drawer in her dresser. Nothing suspicious, absolutely nothing. In the office file cabinet, I found a binder of invoices. Flipping through the bills until they blurred in front of my eyes like lotto balls, I found nothing unusual. Except for the hole in the bagel. Honestly, Cindy was a pro at hiding evidence of infidelity. She was impressive. Next, I accessed her computer, using the password she had told me long ago, which was also printed out and hanging next to the computer. I scrolled through all of Cindy's emails, realizing it was a bit silly since we shared the same account. If there was anything fishy, I would have noticed it long ago. Not surprisingly, I couldn't find a thing. Another dead end. I've been searching for 3 hours and I've got nothing against Cindy. When I read cheating stories online, there's always some evidence. Secret phone records, motel bills, unexplained spending, and more. They hire super sneaky private investigators, install clever phone tapping devices, and catch cheating spouses red-handed. Yet where is all this stuff in my case? If I can't find a thing, my Cindy must be a master at covering her tracks and playing a double game. As I gave up and started cleaning my mess, Cindy walked in through the front door. Kneeling by the laundry basket, I held her dirty underwear. We both froze, her eyes widening like cat saucers. Cindy suggested it was time for a talk, accusing me of following her to Marge's. She described seeing my face behind the open window jamb and hearing grunting in the darkness, questioning if I had stepped in some dog poop. She even mentioned the location where Marge's dog did its dirty deeds. In response, I dismissed the idea of Marge having a dog, likening it to King Kong. I sat there with a silly smile, dirty clothes in hand, feeling trapped. My face and neck grew hot, my throat went dry, and I lost the gift of English speech. I recapped recent events, expressing disbelief at finding Cindy sniffing me dirty laundry and questioning if she didn't trust me. I mumbled about whether she truly believed I was cheating on her, stammering in my defense. Cindy suggested we talk and led me to the living room. Tossing the laundry in the hamper, I got up and followed her, landing on the couch. Cindy sat down next to me, folding her hands in her lap and looking at me intently. Shrewdly, she asked if I was reading erotic stories again on my lunch break at work, to which I nodded embarrassingly. She inquired if the stories were about cheating wives, and I admitted they were. Cindy pressed further, asking if I thought of her when reading those stories. I mumbled in response, averting my gaze, admitting that I did think of her. I justified my actions by explaining that I followed her to Marge's because, upon returning home from work, I found her on the phone, hastily saying, "I gotta go," and hanging up. I went on the offensive, challenging her to explain her behavior. Cindy looked at me with raised eyebrows and a broad smile, shaking her head. She expressed uncertainty about whether to be mad at me or just hug me. Grinning, she mentioned not knowing who she should direct her feelings toward. In response, I frowned and stared back, asking about the person she was talking to when I walked in, urging her not to lie to me. She casually shrugged, disclosing that she was talking to my mother. Apparently, my mother called her almost every day, and Cindy seemed amused by my big investigation triggered by a call from my mom. She remarked on how she felt stupid for forgetting about my mom, highlighting that my mom was yet another phone-happy individual. Cindy tilted her head, smiled slyly at my guilty conscience, and then moved closer, placing her hands on top of mine and squeezing them lightly. Cindy inquired if I had ever found her behavior suspicious or distrustful, to which I admitted that it was just a gut feeling. She continued to smile and affectionately called me a miracle, expressing love despite my quirks. She wrapped her hands around my cheeks, declaring me her favorite man and reassuring me of her love. She acknowledged the need to improve our closeness and suggested addressing it immediately. With those words, she took my hand and led me into the bedroom, locked the door, dimmed the lights, and began undressing me. She asked if I felt better now with sly demons bouncing in her eyes. In response, I expressed my love and admiration, but questioned the warning signals from my gut. Cindy responded with laughter, holding her stomach and wiping away tears. She retrieved a blister of pills from the medicine cabinet and tossed it on the bed, seemingly finding humor in the situation. As I popped the wheels and froze, my wife suggested that I take 2 pills for indigestion. She listened to the rumbling response of my stomach and gave me a stern look, urging me to stop sniffing her dirty underwear. She found it disgusting and agreed with Cindy, acknowledging that when Cindy is right, she's right.
In high school, I was a pretty typical student, focusing on classes, sports, and my social life. I wasn't particularly popular, but I had a tight-knit group of friends. It was during this time that I met Agnes, a girl with a bright smile and a quick wit. We clicked right away, sharing many of the same interests, and over time, our friendship grew into something deeper. By senior year, we were inseparable, and people at school saw us as the classic high school couple. Everything felt perfect. After graduation, Agnes and I planned to attend the same college, and our future together seemed set. We often talked about marriage, and I genuinely believed I had found the person I'd spend my life with. Back then, I couldn't imagine anything that could come between us. I first met Agnes in 9th grade, and by the following year, we were regularly dating. From 10th grade on, our relationship was solid. We made it through high school without any major problems, and as cheesy as it sounds, we had our first physical engaging moment together after senior prom. Once that part of our relationship began, it became a regular thing. We had been talking about marriage since 11th grade, but decided to wait until after college to make any big decisions. College changed Aggie. In high school, everyone knew we were a couple, and the guys stayed away from her. But that didn't carry over once we got to college. While there were a few familiar faces from high school, most of the students were from other places. The guys didn't see Aggie as my girlfriend. They saw her as a beautiful girl, and she was constantly getting hit on. I knew it was happening, but there wasn't much I could do. We had different majors and took separate classes, so we usually only saw each other in the evenings after classes and after I finished work. The attention started to affect Aggie. She became more flirty, to put it simply. Several times I saw her walking with other guys, laughing and talking, but I was across the quad and she didn't notice me. A couple of times I took a shortcut through the student union between classes and saw her in the cafeteria, once with a guy and another time with 2 guys. It didn't hit me until much later that I never saw her with other girls, always guys. It didn't worry me. We were a couple, right? We were in love, right? We were planning to get married, right? So I had nothing to worry about, right? She was gorgeous, so of course guys would be drawn to her. But she was mine, and she showed it every night when we were together. Years later, we graduated, got jobs in our fields, got married, and started a life of wedded bliss. For almost 6 years, I was blissfully unaware, living what felt like an ideal life, until everything came crashing down. My wake-up call came by accident. I was at my desk when Molly from the mailroom dropped off some files. I picked up the top one and began reviewing it, wondering why it had been sent to me since it concerned an account that Wally Bergman was handling. Wally was an old friend from high school and college. About halfway through, I noticed a serious mistake. A quick mental calculation showed that the projections were off by nearly $3 million. I reached for my calculator to verify the numbers when Wally rushed into my office, asking if I had seen the file. "I need to make copies and present this to the Apex people in half an hour," Wally said, clearly stressed. "I have it right here," I replied. Not sure why it ended up with me, but I looked it over. "You might not want to present this to Apex," I added, showing him the mistake. His face turned white. Jesus, Rob, this could have cost me my job. I need to fix this right away, Wally muttered as he grabbed the file and hurried out. It was a Thursday, and Aggie always worked late on Thursdays to prepare payroll for Friday. So, like usual, I went to Bud's bar after work for a half-pound burger and a couple of beers before heading home. I had just finished my meal and was on my second beer when Wally walked in, saw me, and joined me at my booth. He ordered a beer and told the waitress, "Put his tab on me. It's the least I can do after he saved my job today." I shrugged. "No complaints here, Wally." We talked about work for a bit, just the usual stuff. But then Wally shifted the conversation to something personal. "I've got to ask you something, Rob," he said, leaning in. "It's none of my business, but you're a nice guy, and I really like you. Why do you put up with Aggie's nonsense?" I blinked, confused. "I don't know what you mean, Wally." "Why do you let her cheat on you?" he asked bluntly. I stared at him, stunned. "What are you talking about, Wally?" He looked at me and seemed to realize something. His face dropped. "Oh, God, you didn't know?" he mumbled. He started to get up, but I grabbed his arm and pulled him back down. "No way, Wally. You can't drop a bomb like that and run." "Sit down and explain," I demanded. "I don't know what to say, Rob," he stammered, visibly uncomfortable. "Just say it, Wally. Tell me," I insisted. "I thought you knew, Rob. I mean, it's been, 10 years and you didn't know?" Wally looked at me in disbelief. "My God, Rob, how could you not know?" "Know what, Wally?" I asked, my voice low and steady. That Aggie is a round-heeled promiscuous," Wally whispered, looking ashamed. I just stared at him, too shocked to respond. Wally looked at me with regret in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Rob. I wish I hadn't said anything." "But you did, Wally," I said, shaking off the shock. "So now you need to finish." "How do you know?" "How long have you known?" "I've known since our senior year of high school," Wally admitted. "And I know because I'm one of the guys who slept with her." I was floored, but I needed more answers. "Start from the beginning, Wally, and don't leave anything out." "Please, don't leave anything out," I urged again. The story that unfolded was shocking to me. Not just the details, but the fact that it had been happening for over 10 years without me ever having a clue. 2 weeks after the senior prom, Wally went over to his cousin George's house. As usual, he walked in and headed straight for George's bedroom, expecting him to be on the computer. But George wasn't on the computer. "He was on and in, Aggie," Wally stated bluntly. Wally stood there watching, and both Aggie and George saw him. Since neither of them told him to leave, he undressed and waited for his turn. "We took turns with Aggie until she said she had to get cleaned up to meet you when you got off work at Jessup's Market," Wally explained. "He and George would sleep with her whenever I was at work until George got serious with Melody Martin. She slept with me for a couple of weeks, and then one day when I stopped by, she was already with Mike Bella and Justin Walsh. I undressed and joined in. The three of us were with her until she had to leave to meet you," Wally admitted. He continued. "I shared her with several other guys, and many times she'd sleep with a group of 6 or more. I know we were friends," Wally went on, "but it wasn't like we were best friends, you know. And remember how we were at 18, always thinking about Zex." He looked at me and added, "You guys were kind of going steady, but I didn't think it was that serious. I mean, if you were really serious, would she be sleeping with anyone who came along? And it didn't stop in college," Wally added. "I remember her schedule freshman year, Monday through Thursday and Tuesday through Friday with no classes on Wednesday. Her last class on Monday through Thursday ended at 2, and on Tuesday through Friday at 1. I don't remember your schedule," Wally continued, "but when you got out of class, you went to work. When Aggie got out of class, she was off to someone's bedroom. Wednesdays were like all-day Zex marathons. It was like that all through school, Rob. Schedules changed, but the constant was Aggie fooling around until you got off work." "I'm making it sound like it was every day, but it wasn't," he clarified. 2 or 3 times a week. Most of us were shocked when you and Aggie got married. We thought you had to know what she'd been doing. But you married her anyway. A lot of us figured maybe you were one of those guys who liked your woman with other men. Tyler even thought maybe you two were into open relationships, but no one ever saw you with another girl. We always saw Aggie with other guys." "I had no idea, Wally," I finally managed to say. "Damn, Rob, I'm sorry to be the one to tell you, but since you didn't know, it's likely you don't know that she has a regular Thursday night date with Bob and Bill Howard. On the Tuesday nights when you go bowling, she's with Mark Willard. I don't know who else she sees or when, but it's safe to assume that anytime you're off doing something, Aggie is too. Wally said confidently. He paused before adding, "Not that it matters much, but I stopped being with her after you two got married. A single woman is one thing, but fooling around with a married woman is a whole different story." I don't know what to say, Wally, and I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm definitely going to do something. I finished my beer and stood up to leave. I stopped and turned to Wally. "Thanks, Wally. Thanks for the burger, the beer, and for waking me up." As I drove home, I kept replaying what Wally had told me in my head. Did I really believe it? Part of me wanted to say no way. Aggie loved me, and she wouldn't do that. But another part of me knew Wally wouldn't lie. He had to know I'd check on what he said. And if it wasn't true, how could we keep working together? The answer was simple. We couldn't, and Wally was aware of that. It was going to be tough enough working with him knowing what he and Aggie had done, but I figured we'd get past it eventually. After all, I remembered being a teenager, constantly thinking about Zex. I knew that if another guy's girlfriend had offered herself to me back then, and if I didn't have Aggie, I'd probably have taken the chance. The real question was, what the hell do I do now? I didn't have an answer, but one thing was clear. Aggie and I were over. Maybe, just maybe, I could have overlooked a one-night drunken mistake or even a short-term affair if Aggie convinced me it wouldn't happen again. But 10 years of cheating? No way. That night, I pretended to be asleep when Aggie came home after finishing payroll. I ignored her touch. She wants to give me sloppy seconds, I thought, and I'm not going to take it. I'd unknowingly been taking them for years, and it hadn't eliminated me. But now I knew the truth, and just the feel of her hand on me made my skin crawl. For the first time ever, I didn't get in hardness when she touched me. I woke up before Aggie the next morning, made coffee, and was reading the paper when she came downstairs. "What happened to you last night?" she asked. "I came home aroused and eager, and you were already in bed. That's not like you, Rob." "Something I ate didn't sit well with me. I went to bed early," I lied. "Well, I hope you're feeling better today. You'll need to make up for last night," she teased with a smile. As soon as I got to work, I called Felix Mather, a friend from high school who now practiced corporate law. I asked him to recommend a take-no-prisoners divorce lawyer. "Crap," Felix responded. I frowned, confused. "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked. "It means I was hoping this wasn't happening, that you're actually looking for a divorce lawyer," Felix explained. "It means what I thought you and Aggie had isn't what you actually have, and that you finally found out about her." I was taken aback. "What did you think we had? An open marriage or something?" I asked. "How else could Aggie do what she was doing and still stay with you?" Felix replied. "Everyone knew you were devoted to her. It only made sense if you were okay with it." Believe it or not, Felix, I had no idea what she was doing. Not until yesterday. There was a brief silence on the line before Felix finally said, "Call Tom Sweet and tell him I sent you." I contacted Sweet and mentioned Felix had recommended him. He said he could see me that day if I could be there by 1. I agreed and showed up on time. Sweet laid out my options, ranging from an amicable separation to an Attila the Hun scorched earth policy. "We're not in a no-fault state," he explained, "and infidelity is a valid ground for divorce. But to use infidelity, you need solid evidence. Hearsay isn't enough." "How do I get the evidence?" I asked. He handed me a card that read, "Gaston Marshall, private investigator." "His office is just across the street. I can call him now and see if he can meet with you." "Please do," I replied. "I want to get this over with as quickly as possible." Sweet made the call. And 10 minutes later, I found myself in Gaston Marshall's office, learning what needed to be done. Unfortunately, one of the main things required was for me to act completely normal around Aggie, giving her no reason to suspect that I was no longer the clueless fool she was used to. "As unpleasant as it may be," Marshall said, "you can't change your routine. If you're having sex 3 or 4 times a week, you'll have to keep doing it. If you usually initiate, you need to keep that up. Just remember, it's no longer about making love, it's just physical. Don't do anything that might cause her to change her behavior. It's crucial she stays unaware of the shift in your relationship." I went back to my office, swallowed my pride, and called Aggie at work. We had a habit of going out for dinner every Friday night and breakfast every Sunday morning, so when I reached her, I asked, "How about try cochise for dinner?" She agreed. While I was eating veal, Marsala and Aggie was enjoying her rigatoni with white wine. Employees from Marshall Investigations were busy installing wireless cameras and listening devices in our home. As I sipped my Merlot, Marshall's instructions echoed in my mind. "It's natural for you to want to look for the hidden cameras, but you have to resist that urge. If she catches you, Everything we're working for could fall apart. You also need to act natural in the bedroom, which won't be easy unless you're comfortable with being watched. The system is sound and motion activated, and you will be on camera. Don't let the idea of my employees watching you interfere. There's a switch that lets you turn off the system while you're home, he had warned. But people tend to forget to turn it back on when they leave. My advice? Leave the system running and pretend you're filming a spicy tape. After dinner, I asked Aggie, "Feel like grabbing a few drinks and maybe going dancing?" "No," she said. "We need to get home so you can make up for last night." On the drive home, she slid over next to me and unzipped my pants. "Be careful, sweetie. Don't crash and make me bite something off." In my head, what she was doing wasn't special anymore. It was just the same thing she had likely done with 100 other men over the past 10 years. But as disgusted as I was, after a few minutes, my body reacted. Soon, it was over, and I pulled into our driveway. "Hurry up and get to the bedroom," Aggie commanded. I couldn't follow Marshall's advice. There was no way I could act natural knowing I might be performing for an audience. It would already be hard enough to pretend everything was normal while being physical engaging with Aggie. So I went to where the switch was and turned the system off. I left my cell phone on the car seat, figuring I'd see it when I left the house, reminding me to turn the system back on. I wasn't sure if Aggie noticed or not, but I didn't make love to her that night. I just went through the motions. Unfortunately, once wasn't enough for her, and I had to go 2 more rounds before she let me sleep. The next morning, I got up and dressed for my usual run. Before I left, Aggie reminded me, "I won't be here when you get back. I've got a hair appointment, but I should be home by 2. I had always wondered why her hair appointments took from 9 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. Aggie used to say it was because she ended up gossiping with the other regulars and sometimes went to lunch with them. That could have been true, but after everything I'd learned recently, I suspected she was probably meeting one of her friends, either before or after the appointment. As I left, I made sure to turn the system back on. I doubted anything would happen while I was out on my run, but I knew I had to get into the habit of keeping the system on whenever I wasn't home. The switch only controlled the cameras. The listening devices and phone tap were always active. After my usual 5-mile run, I returned home and headed down to the basement, where I had told Marshall to store the recorders. I thought it was the best spot since Aggie rarely went down there and almost never into my work area. There were 2 receivers in the cabinet, one for the listening devices and phone tap, and the other for the DVD recorder connected to the wireless cameras. I checked the phone tap recorder, and sure enough, my suspicions were confirmed. I played back the recording. "Hello?" Aggie's voice. "Good morning, lover. Are we still on for today?" a man's voice asked, one that sounded disturbingly familiar. "You bet. The wife took the kids to the zoo, so we have until 6 tonight," Aggie replied. "You know I can't stay that long. I need to be home by 2. Any later, and Rob might start asking questions. He's already wondered why I don't get home until 2. "Then skip the hair appointment and come over so we can make it happen," the man suggested. "Yeah, sure," Aggie responded. "And what do I tell Rob when he asks why my hair isn't done after being gone so long?" "I want more time with you, baby, but we'll have to settle for what we can get." As I listened, my blood ran cold. I recognized the man's voice. It was my cousin, Lou. Fury surged through me as I went back upstairs, wondering how many of my other relatives Aggie had been with, or was still seeing. By the time Aggie got home from her so-called hair appointment, I had managed to get my anger under control. I kept it together, and about an hour after she got back, I faked a fall down the basement stairs. "I think I pulled a muscle or something. My back's injuring me," I told her. That excuse would buy me a few days of not having to be physical engaged with her. On Monday, I called Aggie at work and said, "I'm going to be out of town on Tuesday. I'll be gone until Friday, but I'll be back in time to take you out to dinner." Of course, there was no trip. I figured it might be a waste of 3 days, but I didn't think so. I traveled about once a month for work, and Aggie was always home when I made my nightly check-in calls. Since I called at random times, anywhere between 7 and 10, I doubted she waited for my calls before heading out. If she was cheating as much as I suspected, she was probably doing it in our bed while I was talking to her. That was my hope, anyway. If the cameras caught her, I'd have the undeniable proof my lawyer needed for the divorce. That evening, Aggie tried to initiate. "I need something to hold me over for the 3 nights you'll be gone," she said. "Yeah, right," I thought, but I told her, "My back still hurts too much." On Tuesday morning, Aggie kissed me goodbye, suitcase in hand, as I headed out for my supposed business trip. I drove to work, put in most of the day, and then left at 3 p.m., parking a block away from the house. With my laptop in hand, I accessed the software Marshall had installed and started listening to the phone tap. "Hello?" Aggie's voice came through. "Hey, Zexy Hunk, it's me," she said playfully. "What's up?" a man responded. "Hubby just left on a 3-day trip. You ready to spend 3 fun-filled nights with me?" Aggie asked. "Does a duck walk barefoot on the beach?" he joked. "I'll take that as a yes," she replied. "You call Tony, I've got to get to work, but I'll be home by 6. See you then." I shut down my laptop and called Tom Sweet. "Have the papers ready to serve by Thursday," I instructed him, and explained how I wanted them delivered. "That will cost more than the usual fee," Sweet cautioned. "I don't care," I replied. I left the neighborhood, drove to the other side of town, and checked into a motel. It had a restaurant and bar next door, so I settled in for my 3-day stay. The bar was a country western joint, with a jukebox full of great dance songs. Just my kind of place. Every night I went there, and every night a few unattached women seemed unwilling to let me sit alone while the music played. The first night, a beautiful redhead came up to me and said, "Come on, sugar, they're playing our song," as she grabbed my hand, pulling me off the bar stool and onto the dance floor. As we started to waltz, she said, "Don't get the wrong idea, sugar. I'm not on the prowl. I just love to dance, and you were sitting there." Her name was Rhonda, and after the dance, she invited me to join her and her friends, Laura and Shelby, at their table. I spent the rest of the evening dancing with them. "We're here 2 or 3 nights a week," Rhonda said as I was leaving. "Then I'll probably see you again," I replied, feeling the best I had in days. The next afternoon at 3 p.m., I was parked a block away from the house again, watching the footage from the wireless cameras of the previous night. The 2 guys who had joined Aggie in the bedroom were at least 6 years younger than her, and I wondered if it was youthful energy she was chasing. The scene wasn't anything special, just standard stuff, but it was surreal to watch my wife being double-teamed. What I was really interested in was the audio. I expected to hear Aggie mocking me or my lovemaking, but to my surprise, she didn't. She never even mentioned me, except when one of the guys said he wished they could meet up more often. Aggie apologized, saying, "Sorry, but my husband comes first." Wednesday followed the same pattern. The only time she brought me up was to remind them, "You need to be out of the house by 6 in the morning. None of the neighbors are early risers, so I want you gone before anyone sees you." By Thursday morning, they left promptly at 6, so I called my attorney and moved the serving of the papers to Friday morning. At 5:45 a.m. on Friday, I was parked just down the street. At 5:55 a.m., the front door opened and the 2 men walked out. As they turned to say goodbye to Aggie, they spotted a man standing by the door. He stepped forward, handed the papers to Aggie, and walked away, leaving her and her companion standing there, stunned. I pulled up in front of the house and honked, making sure Aggie saw me. I waved goodbye and drove off. The papers she received weren't just legal documents. They included a letter from me. It said that I never wanted to speak to her again unless it was through our attorneys. I didn't want to hear excuses or promises that it would never happen again. I didn't want to hear that she only loved me or that the sex with others was meaningless. I didn't want to hear that we could move past this because of our love. I didn't want any of the typical lies cheaters come up with when they get caught. Of course, Aggie ignored the letter. 15 minutes after I drove off, my phone rang. It was Aggie. I let it go to voicemail, along with the next 7 calls from her. When I got to work, I told my secretary, "Martha, I've left Aggie. Don't put any of her calls through." She nodded. As I turned to head into my office, another thought occurred to me. "Oh, and Martha, if she shows up, tell her I'm not in. Say I'm meeting with a client." Martha gave me a sympathetic smile. "No problem, Mr. Burns." 5 minutes later, I spoke with Iris at the front desk. "If my wife shows up, call me and stall her. Give me enough time to slip out the side door. I'll head to the cafe and wait until she leaves." "I've got you covered, Mr. Burns," Iris assured me. I thanked her and thought, not for the first time, that a good secretary is worth her weight in gold. Aggie called my cell 17 times that day. I ignored every call. During lunch, I called my dad and brother to fill them in on what was happening. I asked my dad to tell Mom and to do his best to keep her from pushing me to work things out with Aggie. "I'll talk to her," Dad said, "but you know how your mother feels about Aggie. It's going to be tough." I sighed. My mom had always seen Aggie as the daughter she never had. At the end of the workday, I still had plenty to do. And since I didn't have to rush home, I decided to stay late and catch up. Around 5 p.m., Martha came by to let me know she was leaving. "I'll see you tomorrow, Mr. Burns," she said, then added, By the way, your wife called 5 times before noon. Each time I told her you'd instructed me not to put her through. I think she finally got the message. She hasn't called since. I thanked her and kept working until about 7 p.m. When I reached the lobby, Iris was gone and Hank, our night watchman, was sitting at the reception desk. Big night out with the missus? Hank asked. Why would you think that? She's out there waiting for you, Hank said, nodding toward the parking lot. We're getting a divorce, Hank, I explained. She wants to talk, and I don't. If she knocks, don't let her in. And if she uses the intercom, tell her you're alone in the building, and that the log says my car's here because it wouldn't start. Let her know the towing company's coming in the morning to take it to the shop. No problem, Mr. Burns. Divorces aren't fun. I've been through 2 myself. I nodded and slipped out the back door to avoid Aggie. I looped around the block, crossed the street, and walked down the alley to the back entrance of Dave's Diner. I took a seat where I could keep an eye on Aggie, who was still waiting by my car. I ordered the special and watched her while I ate. Halfway through my dessert, I saw her approach the building and press the intercom. Hank must have followed my instructions because after a short while, she returned to her car and drove off. I finished my dessert, had one last cup of coffee, and then left. Later that night, I stopped by a bar for a couple of beers. There were a few women sitting alone, clearly hoping for a dance partner, but I wasn't in the mood. I had my 2 beers and left. Saturday morning was hectic. I had a lot to take care of, things I should have handled before serving Aggie the divorce papers. I just hoped it wasn't too late and that she hadn't already done what I should have done first. I went to the bank and cleaned out all the joint accounts. I took the certificates of deposit and my personal papers out of the safe deposit box, but left all of Aggie's belongings there. I also took off my wedding ring and left it in the box for her to find. Afterward, I stopped at the Waffle House for breakfast and used my phone to cancel our 2 joint credit cards. That left me with just a Visa and an American Express in my name. Aggie had her own 2 cards, so all I really did was prevent her from taking cash advances on the joint cards. Once I finished breakfast, I drove back to the motel, parked, and called a cab to take me to the nearest Avis rental office. I rented the cheapest car they had and returned to the motel, spending the afternoon lounging by the pool and reading a book. Before dinner, I turned on my phone to check messages. There were 9, all from Aggie. I deleted them and turned the phone back off. That night, the bar was packed. It was Friday and they had a live band playing. I found a spot at the bar and ordered a beer. Halfway through it, I felt a tug on my shirt. I turned and saw Rhonda standing there. "Hey, cowboy," she smiled. "Why are you sitting here when there's a seat at our table for you?" "I didn't see you with the crowd," I admitted. "To be honest, even if I had, I wouldn't have joined. I wouldn't want to take things for granted." "Nonsense, come on," she insisted, pulling me toward the table. Laura and Shelby were there too, and I greeted them as I sat down. "There's something off about this picture," I said, looking at the 3 of them. 3 stunning women, sitting alone, and you had to come get me? That's just not right. "We get attention," Rhonda explained, "but it's usually from idiots. They see the wedding rings and assume we're here looking for a fling, just some wives out to cheat. We're here to dance, and only a few guys get that. The rest think they're God's gift to women, and we have to fend them off." After the other night, I knew they saw me as safe. "We know you're one of the good guys," Rhonda said with a wink. "You've got an open invitation to join us whenever you're here." "It's none of my business, so feel free to tell me to back off," I began cautiously. "But I've got to ask, why are 3 beautiful married women spending time here without your husbands?" "Fair question," Rhonda acknowledged. "Laura's husband is in the Army Reserve and got deployed to Afghanistan. She was going stir-crazy alone, so we started bringing her out. Shelby's husband works evenings, and mine's a long-haul trucker who's gone a lot. We've teamed up to keep each other company, and we love dancing, so here we are." "What about you?" she asked. "I noticed you had a ring last time, but it's gone now." "I served my wife with divorce papers yesterday morning," I said simply. "I left the ring for her to find." "Does that mean you're free to hunt?" Laura asked. "Not at all," I said quickly. "The divorce is for infidelity, and I'm not about to do anything she could use against me in court." "Good," Laura said with a grin. "We've got a safe dance partner." I spent the rest of the evening dancing with Rhonda, Laura, and Shelby, sharing them with the occasional guy they agreed to dance with. When the bar closed, I went back to the motel in a surprisingly good mood for the first time in days. Sunday was quiet, spent by the pool with a book. On Monday, I drove the rental car to work, hoping Aggie wouldn't see my car and would think I was still out of town, keeping her away. Throughout the week, I got between 6 and 10 calls a day from her, which I ignored. Twice, she called from numbers I didn't recognize. And when I answered and heard her voice, I immediately hung up. Every night after dinner, I stopped by the bar for a beer or two. Rhonda, Laura, and Shelby were there on Wednesday and Friday, and I joined them for dancing, until 10 on Wednesday and until closing on Friday. By Saturday, I figured Aggie would realize I wasn't going to talk to her, so I returned the rental and drove my car to work on Monday. That turned out to be a mistake. Monday afternoon, when I came out of the building, I saw that Aggie was parked right next to my car. As soon as she saw me, she got out and stood by my driver's side door. "We need to talk, Rob," she said. When I reached my car, I ignored her, but she moved to block the door. "Come on, Rob, you need to let me explain," she insisted. I pushed her aside and she stumbled but didn't fall. By the time she regained her balance, I was already in the car. I rolled down the window and said, "You need to go back and read the letter that came with the divorce papers. Aggie, I will not speak to you unless my attorney is present. And even then, it will only be about the divorce." "I don't want a divorce, Rob, and I don't want you to do this," she pleaded. "Aggie, it's over. Accept it, because I'm not changing my mind." I rolled the window up and drove away, leaving her standing there. On Tuesday, it became clear that Aggie wasn't going to accept my refusal to talk. When I walked to my car after work, two guys approached me and grabbed my arms. I recognized them as the same two who had been with Aggie in our bedroom. One of them said, "Don't do anything stupid, old man, and you won't get hurt. Miss Aggie says you're being stubborn, and she wants to talk to you. So we're taking you to her, either the easy way or the hard way. But you're coming with us, old man." I was only 6, maybe 7 years older than those guys. They probably assumed that because I was in a suit and tie carrying a briefcase, I was some soft, older guy. I figured I could take them. They wouldn't expect me to fight back, so I could likely take one out by surprise, and one-on-one, I was confident I could handle the other. Either way, a commotion would draw attention, and their little hijacking plan would fall apart. But then I thought, do I really want to do that? If Aggie was willing to go this far just to get me, what might she try next? If I sent these two back to her all roughed up, it could escalate things. So I let them shove me into the car, sitting between them with my briefcase on my lap as they drove me to the house. Inside, Aggie told them, "Sit him down in a chair and make sure he stays there." She turned to me and said, "We are not getting a divorce." I tried to stand, but the two guys pushed me back down, one of them warning, "You'll stay put if you know what's good for you." Aggie continued, "We're staying married, but there are going to be some changes. I'm sorry you found out about my medical issue, but now that you know, you'll have to deal with it. I love you. Believe it or not, I do, and I'm not letting you go." "Medical issue? What medical issue?" I asked. "I have nymphomania. I've been a nymphomaniac since high school. You triggered it when you took my pureness." "That's ridiculous," I said. "There are treatments for that." "Yes, there are," she replied. "I've tried them all. They make me sluggish and stupid, and I won't live like that. Besides, I enjoy being a nympho. I love Zex, and you know that. I barely ever leave you alone. What I do doesn't hurt you. I love you. I spoil you. So what if I share what you can't use? If you could stay hard 24/7, I wouldn't need anyone else. But you can't, and I have needs. So I let others have what's extra. I don't love them. I love you, and I always come home to you." She handed me some papers. "Here's how it's going to work. This is a post-nuptial agreement where you agree that I can have as many lovers as I need. If you later decide to leave, you'll get nothing." I stared at her. "And what do I get besides a wife who sleeps around?" "You get the same loving wife you've had for 6 years. You thought our marriage was perfect, even though I was doing this the whole time. The only thing wrong now is your ego. You need to accept that things will continue just as they have. It doesn't mean you're not man enough for me. You're a great lover. You always satisfy me, but you just can't keep up with my needs." I looked her in the eyes. "I'll tell you what, Agnes." She hated when I called her that. "I'll sign it if you make a few changes." She looked intrigued. "What kind of changes?" "You don't sleep with me on the same days you sleep with others, and we sleep in separate bedrooms." "I can't do that," she quickly responded. "I need you in bed with me. Why can't you understand that I love you and don't want to lose you?" "That's fine, Agnes. Don't make the changes," I said casually. "I didn't want to sign your so-called agreement anyway." Agitated, she shot back, Fine, I'll make the changes, and I'll work on getting you back in bed later. She stormed off, saying, I'll go make the changes on the computer and bring it back. I tried to get up from the chair, but the two guys held me down. I told them, I need to use the bathroom. One of them said, just pee your pants. Miss Aggie said you're staying put until she says otherwise. 5 minutes later, Aggie returned with the revised document. She read it to me and asked, where do I sign? I gestured to the pen she was holding. Your goons won't let me get up. Let him up, she instructed them. I stood, walked over to her, and set my briefcase on the table. I took the pen from her, but then set it down, saying, not that I don't trust you, but I'm going to read it to make sure it says what you claim. I picked up the papers, read through them, and then laughed. I tore the document in half and threw the pieces in her face. Grabbing my briefcase, I headed for the door. Stop him! Aggie yelled, and the two guys moved to block me. When they got close enough, I swung my briefcase toward the first guy's head. It was a solid strike, and he went down. The second guy was caught off guard, and before he could react, I was on him. I punched him in the mouth, causing him to stumble back. I followed with a hard kick to the groin, and he collapsed. Knowing I needed to keep them down, I went to work, kicking both of them in the lap, ribs, and head until Aggie screamed, Stop it, Rob, or I'll shoot you. I looked over and saw Aggie pointing a Colt at me. Go ahead and shoot, you miserable witch, I said as I pulled out my cell phone. I called emergency and gave my name and address. My wife is pointing a Colt at me and threatening to shoot, I told the operator. They advised me to stay calm and said a patrol car was on the way. I hung up and said, Thanks, Agnes. This will make the divorce a lot easier with you in jail. She snapped back, That was stupid, Rob. When the police get here, you'll be the one arrested. You came in, saw me with friends, got jealous and attacked them. It'll be your word against ours, 3 against 1, and we're all fully clothed. You'll be arrested for attack. Oh, Agnes, your love for me is really shining through now, I mocked. Don't worry, Rob, she said confidently. I'll bail you out and Barry and Tony won't press charges. It'll all blow over, I replied. Think again, Agnes. Hank saw those 2 idiots pick me up at work, and Joyce next door saw them drag me into the house. My story is that you had me brought here against my will. When I tried to leave, you ordered your lovers to stop me, and they failed. Then you pulled a Colt. I may spend a night in jail, but once my witnesses speak, you'll be the one behind bars. And I won't be paying your bail. I continued. Let's see what we've got here. Hijacking, unlawful detainment, threatening with a firearm, and making false statements to the police. There may be more I'm forgetting, but your best bet, Agnes, is to keep quiet. Aggie didn't listen, and she and her 2 goons lied to the police. I was taken to jail. The next morning, I called Tom Sweet, told him what happened, and asked him to coordinate with Gaston Marshall to get the surveillance tapes. Aggie soon learned she couldn't bail me out because a judge had to set bail, and that wouldn't happen until Monday. Tom had a friend in the DA's office who watched the tapes showing Barry and Tony restraining me while Aggie pointed the Colt and threatened me. The DA also heard her say she'd lie to the police. When Aggie showed up at the courthouse on Monday for my bail hearing, she was arrested. Warrants were issued for Barry and Tony, and they were locked up by nightfall. I refused to bail out Aggie, and her parents couldn't afford it. Her lawyer contacted me, asking if I'd put up the house as security for her bail. I laughed and hung up. I moved back into the house, hired a locksmith to change the locks, and got a protection order against Aggie to keep her away if she got out of jail. She couldn't come within 1,000 feet of me without being arrested again. As good as Aggie might have been in bed, it wasn't worth doing hard time for, and both Barry and Tony cut deals, giving her up. Aggie later claimed she never would have pulled the trigger, that she was just trying to stop me from hurting them. The jury believed she was trying to stop me from going too far, given some of the things she said, specifically her claims of love for me. She was found not guilty of the felony menacing charge, but convicted of unlawful restraint, filing a false police report, and a few minor offenses. The judge gave her 9 months in county jail and 1,000 hours of community service. While she was in jail, the divorce was finalized, and all I lost was 20% of the house's equity. I put the money in her account and went to the bar next to the motel where I had been staying. I was lucky. Rhonda and Shelby were there. I asked them to help me celebrate my first day of freedom. Laura wasn't there because her husband was back from deployment, and they were catching up. So, why celebrate with us? Rhonda asked. I'm taking a shot in the dark, I replied. I saw the rings on Laura and Shelby, but you're not wearing one. I don't see any tan lines either, so I'm guessing there's no long-haul trucker in your life. Plus, I've always had a thing for redheads. Shelby laughed and said, "You were busted, girl," as I pulled Rhonda off her chair and led her to the dance floor. As I drove away from the scene outside my former home, a sense of finality washed over me. I thought I'd feel more anger, more sadness, but instead, there was an eerie calm, a realization that the hardest part wasn't behind me, but that I was finally facing it. The truth I had ignored for so many years had finally come to light, and while it hurt, there was a strange relief in having nothing more to pretend about. The months that followed the divorce were difficult, but not in the ways I had anticipated. I wasn't crippled by the loss of Aggie. I wasn't haunted by the memories of what we used to be. Instead, what weighed on me were the smaller things, the routines we'd built, the little habits that had defined my daily life. I had grown so used to her being around that I almost didn't know how to function without that shadow hanging over me. Even though our marriage had been a lie for so long, there was a hole where the lie used to be. I went through the motions at first, trying to fill that void. Work was a blessing in those early days. I threw myself into my job with a single-minded focus, taking on projects that would keep me at the office late, leaving me too tired to think about anything else when I got home. But I knew I couldn't hide in work forever. Eventually, the office would close, the lights would go out, and I'd have to face the emptiness waiting for me at home. That's when I realized something important. This was my chance to rebuild. My life was no longer tied to Aggie's whims, her betrayals, or the deceit that had poisoned everything between us. I was free, and I could decide for the first time in years what I wanted that freedom to look like. So, I started small. I redecorated the house room by room. The bedroom, where so much of my disillusionment had played out, was the first to change. New sheets, new furniture, a fresh coat of paint. The bed that had once been a battlefield was now a place of peace. Just for me. I got rid of everything that reminded me of the past, every token of the life Aggie and I had built together, and replaced it with pieces that reflected who I was now. It was liberating, in a way I hadn't expected. I thought that removing the physical reminders of Aggie would be painful, that it would drive home the loss of the relationship. But instead, it felt like shedding a skin that no longer fit. Each item I removed, each corner of the house I reclaimed, made me feel lighter, more in control. This was my home now. Just mine. Of course, I couldn't just erase her from my mind. The memories were still there, lurking. Every so often, I'd catch myself thinking about her, wondering if I had missed something, if I could have done something differently. But those thoughts were fleeting, overshadowed by a deeper understanding that the fault wasn't mine alone. I had trusted someone who didn't deserve my trust. I had given my love to someone who had never truly valued it. And that was on her, not me. Rhonda was a constant presence during this time. What started as casual nights out dancing became more frequent, and I found myself drawn to her more than I had anticipated. She was different from Aggie in every possible way. Where Aggie had been all about appearances, Rhonda was refreshingly honest. She had a way of grounding me, reminding me that life wasn't about chasing after the perfect image, but about finding happiness in the simple things. We spent more time together, and slowly, I began to see a future where I wasn't defined by the wreckage of my past relationship. But I wasn't ready to jump into anything serious, not yet. I needed time to heal, to figure out who I was outside of the relationship that had dominated my life for so long. I didn't want to repeat the same mistakes, and Rhonda seemed to understand that. She didn't push, didn't ask for more than I was willing to give. She just was there, and that was enough. As the seasons changed, so did I. I began to fill my life with new experiences. I reconnected with old friends, the kind I hadn't spoken to since high school or college, and realized how much I had let those relationships fade because I was so consumed by my life with Aggie. I started running again, something I hadn't done in years, and found a new appreciation for the quiet moments it gave me. The mornings became my favorite time of day, before the world woke up, when it was just me, the open road, and the sound of my feet hitting the pavement. I also discovered new passions, things I never would have explored while I was with Aggie. I took up cooking, something I'd always been terrible at, and slowly, through trial and error, I got better. There was something satisfying about creating something from scratch, about knowing that I could nourish myself in a way that wasn't just physical. It was symbolic of the way I was rebuilding my life, one meal, one day, one step at a time. There were still hard days, of course. days when the weight of the past felt too heavy to carry, when the memories of betrayal came rushing back, uninvited. But those days became fewer and farther between. With each passing month, the pain dulled, replaced by a growing sense of hope. Hope that I could build something better for myself, that I could find happiness again, not in the way I had before, but in a way that was truer, more authentic. Rhonda and I continued to see each other, and over time, something deeper began to form between us. It wasn't the whirlwind romance I had experienced with Aggie, but that was okay. In fact, it was better. This was something built on trust, on mutual respect. I wasn't rushing into it, and neither was she. We were taking our time, getting to know each other slowly, and that felt right. One night, as we sat together on my porch watching the stars, Rhonda turned to me and asked, "Do you ever think about what might have been if things had been different with Aggie?" I thought about it for a moment, then shook my head. No, because if things had been different with her, I wouldn't be here now. I wouldn't have learned what I needed to learn, and I wouldn't have met you. She smiled, a soft, understanding smile, and we sat there in comfortable silence, both of us content with the present, not weighed down by the past. In the end, I realized that what I had gone through, as painful as it was, had shaped me into the person I was now. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the loss, it had all been part of my journey. And while I wouldn't wish that kind of pain on anyone, I also wouldn't change it, because it brought me to a place of clarity, of peace, where I could finally see myself, not as the sufferer of someone else's lies, but as someone who had survived, someone who had come out the other side stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever life had in store for me next. This was my story now, my life, and I was determined to live it on my own terms. Whatever came next, I knew I'd face it with open eyes, a steady heart, and the knowledge that I was capable of more than I had ever realized. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Truly, deeply free.